When my stepmother slapped me across the face, the jazz band stopped playing, and the entire ballroom went silent. My cheek burned, but my heart was ice cold because I knew every single camera in that room was rolling. Yet the real trap was not mine. It was my grandmother's. She stood up and asked just one simple question about $3.4 million that made my stepmother's perfect life crumble right there in her designer heels. My name is Cassidy Rowan, and if there is one thing I have learned after nearly 30 years of navigating the minefield that is my family, it is that silence is the loudest weapon in the room. I stood on the periphery of the grand ballroom at the Denver Country Club, clutching a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking. The room smelled of expensive lilies, roasted prime rib, and the heavy, cloying scent of old money. It was my grandmother's 80th birthday, a celebration that was supposed to honor Evelyn Rowan, the matriarch of the Everpine Lodge's empire. However, anyone with eyes could see that this was not really about Evelyn. This was the Victoria Rowan show. Victoria, my stepmother, glided through the crowd like a swan, all white feathers and effortless grace. She was wearing a bespoke silk gown that probably cost more than my first car. She had one hand resting possessively on the back of my father's tuxedo jacket, and the other gesturing elegantly as she charmed the board of directors. She laughed at their jokes, tilting her head just so, projecting the image of the devoted daughter-in-law who had sacrificed her prime years to care for an aging woman and a grieving widower. My father, Daniel, looked tired but compliant, a prop in her carefully curated stage play. I adjusted the hem of my navy dress. It was simple, professional, and intentionally designed to blend into the curtains. I was not here to make a scene. I was barely here at all. To the guests, I was just a footnote in the Rowan family history, the daughter from the first marriage who worked with computers and presumably lacked social graces. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne, and I stepped back to let him pass, nearly colliding with a man in a sharp gray suit. I recognized him immediately. It was Arthur Sterling, a venture capitalist who had recently invested heavily in medical tech. "Excuse me," he said, steadying his glass. Then he paused, squinting at me. "Wait, I know you. You are Cassidy Rowan, right? I read that piece in Wired last week, the one about the cybersecurity protocols for remote surgery units." I felt a rare flicker of pride. "Yes, that was me. I am surprised you saw it." "Saw it? My team memorized it," Sterling said, his enthusiasm genuine. "The way you isolated the data packets to prevent third-party interception was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I had no idea you were related to the Everpine Rowans. You are doing incredible work. Cassidy, that code saved millions of patient records from the breach last month." For a moment, the cold knot in my chest loosened. Here, in this room of people who only cared about property values and ski lodge occupancy rates, someone actually saw me. "Thank you," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips. It was a team effort at Northbridge Dynamics, but I was proud of the architecture we built. "Proud? You should be leading the industry," Sterling insisted. He opened his mouth to say more, but a manicured hand landed softly on his shoulder. Victoria had materialized out of nowhere. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes were hard as flint as they darted to me and then back to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Victoria cooed, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "I see you have met our Cassidy. She is quite the little worker bee, isn't she? Always tinkering away in some dark room with her machines." "She was just telling me about her security work," Sterling said, looking slightly confused by the interruption. "It sounds revolutionary." Victoria laughed, a light, dismissive sound that stripped all the weight from his words. "Oh, you are too kind to indulge her. Cassidy loves her little computer games. We keep telling her she needs to get out more, meet real people. But you know how introverts are." She did not wait for him to respond. She physically turned her body to block me from his view, effectively cutting me out of the conversation. "But you simply must meet Brianna. She just returned from Milan and has some fascinating ideas about redesigning the interiors of the Aspen Lodge. Brie, come here. Darling." Bree, my half-sister, floated over in a cloud of pink chiffon. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with the kind of glowing, well-fed confidence that comes from never having been told no in your entire life. "Mr. Sterling," Bree beamed, extending a hand. "Mom told me you are a patron of the arts." "And just look at her," Victoria said, beaming at her biological daughter. "Now, this is the future of the Rowan family. Beauty, grace, and a heart of gold. Cassidy, dear, why don't you go check if the kitchen has brought out the cake yet? You look a little lost over here." It was a dismissal, plain and simple. Sterling looked uncomfortable, glancing at me with an apologetic expression, but the social current Victoria created was too strong to swim against. I nodded stiffly and retreated to the shadows near the service entrance. I did not go to the kitchen. Instead, I watched. The evening proceeded exactly as Victoria had scripted it. There was a video montage of my grandmother's life, but somehow, half the photos featured Victoria. Then came the speeches. Bree took the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "When I think of family," Bree said, looking out at the crowd with teary eyes, "I think of the woman who held us all together. My mother, Vicky. She came into this family when it was broken, when my father was lost, and she built a home filled with love. We are a perfect family because of you. Mom, thank you for being the only mother figure we have ever needed." I stood by a pillar, gripping my water glass so hard I thought it might shatter. The erasure was total. My mother, the woman who had built the first lodge with her bare hands alongside my father, the woman who died too young and in too much pain, was not even a ghost in this room. She was nothing. According to Bree and Victoria, the Rowan family history began the day Victoria walked through the door. I looked over at the head table. My grandmother, Evelyn, sat in her wheelchair. She was not smiling. Her face was unreadable, a mask of stone carved by 80 years of harsh winters and harder business deals. She was looking at Bree, then at Victoria, and finally, her gaze drifted across the room until it found me in the shadows. She gave the slightest nod, so imperceptible that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. The master of ceremonies returned to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just a celebration of age, it is a celebration of legacy. Mrs. Victoria Rowan has informed us that there will be a significant announcement regarding the structural ownership of Everpine Lodges later this evening." I saw Victoria straighten up, her chest puffed out. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She looked hungry, not for food, but for power. I moved closer to the side of the stage, needing to be near the exit if this became too much to bear. As I passed a heavy velvet curtain separating the main hall from a private alcove, I heard hushed voices. I paused. "It is all prepared. Victoria," a man's voice said. I recognized it as Mr. Lanner, the family attorney who had been on Victoria's payroll for years. "The papers are on the table in the back office. Once the announcement is made, Evelyn signs, and it is done. After tonight, everything will officially be in your name." "Finally," Victoria hissed. The sweetness was gone from her voice, replaced by a cold, metallic greed. "The old woman has held on to the purse strings long enough. I need full executive control if we are going to sell the Montana property before the end of the fiscal quarter." "Does Daniel know?" "Daniel does what I tell him to do," Victoria snapped. "Just make sure the notary is ready." My heart hammered against my ribs. They were going to liquidate the Montana property, the very first lodge my grandmother built, and worse, they were tricking Evelyn into signing over total control under the guise of an anniversary gift. I stepped away from the curtain, my mind racing. I needed to find my father. I needed to find someone. But as I turned back toward the crowd, the music lowered, and the room shifted its focus back to the family. A boisterous man near the front, a longtime investor named Mr. Galloway, raised his voice. He had clearly had a few too many scotches. "Hey, before we get to the big news, I was looking at the press release program on the table here. It lists the expected shareholders for the next term. I see Victoria. I see Daniel. I see young Brianna. But where's the eldest? Where is Cassidy? The room went quiet. It was an awkward, drunken question, but it cut straight through the polite veneer Victoria had plastered over the evening. Victoria froze. Her smile twitched, threatening to slide off her face. She marched over to Mr. Galloway, laughing nervously. "Oh, Bob, you know how complicated trust funds are. Cassidy has other arrangements." "Other arrangements?" Mr. Galloway persisted, oblivious to the danger he was in. "She is the firstborn. Doesn't she get a seat on the board?" "Cassidy is not interested in the business," Victoria said, her voice rising an octave. "She has her little computer job." "Actually," I said. I did not mean to speak. The word just slipped out. I was standing 10 feet away, and in the silence of the room, my voice carried. Victoria whipped her head around. Her eyes were wide with panic and rage. She crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides, grabbing my upper arm with a grip that dug into my bicep. "What are you doing?" she hissed under her breath, dragging me away from the center of the room toward a decorative alcove near the buffet. "I am standing here," I said, trying to pull my arm free, and he asked a question. "You are trying to humiliate me," Victoria accused, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Tonight is my night. I have worked for 20 years to keep this family respectable, and you just stand there like a sour mood cloud, trying to make people pity you." "I have not said a word, Victoria," I said calmly, though my pulse was racing. "You are the one who erased my mother from the speeches. You are the one selling the Montana Lodge." Victoria stopped dead. Her face went pale, then mottled red. "You were spying on me." "I heard you," I said. "Does Grandma know you are selling her history?" "You little ungrateful brat," Victoria spat. The veneer of the perfect hostess completely vanished. We were close to the guests, too close. People were turning their heads. The jazz band had stopped playing as the musicians sensed the altercation. "I am not a child anymore, Victoria," I said, my voice steady. "And I am not going to let you steal this company." "Steal?" Victoria shrieked. The word echoed off the high ceilings. "I saved this family. I raised you. I fixed the mess your mother left behind." "My mother built this," I said. "You just spent it." That was the breaking point. Victoria's hand moved before I could react. It was not a theatrical, slow-motion swing. It was a sharp, violent crack. Her palm connected with my cheekbone with enough force to snap my head to the side. Smack. The sound was sickeningly loud. It cut through the air like a gunshot. For a second, time seemed to suspend. The pain bloomed hot and stinging across the left side of my face, radiating into my ear. My skin felt like it was on fire. The room went deathly silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The murmurs ceased. Every single pair of eyes in the Denver Country Club was fixed on us. I did not bring my hand up to touch my face. I did not cry out. I did not stumble. I slowly turned my head back to look Victoria directly in the eyes. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. For a split second, she looked satisfied. But then the reality of what she had just done crashed down on her. She looked around the room, her eyes darting frantically. She provoked me," Victoria stammered, her voice shrill in the silence. She looked at the shocked faces of the board members. "You did not hear what she said. She insulted the family. She is unstable." My father, Daniel, stepped forward, looking terrified. "Vicky, what did you do?" "I was disciplining her," Victoria yelled, doubling down because it was the only way she knew how to survive. "Someone has to. She is trying to ruin this night." I stood perfectly still. My cheek was throbbing, but inside, a strange, cold calm settled over me. I looked past Victoria's shoulder. In the corners of the room, the red tally lights of the event cameras were glowing steady and bright. The videographer hired to document the perfect night had captured everything in high definition. The club's internal security feed was recording, and half the guests had their phones out, ready to capture the big announcement, inadvertently live-streaming the assault instead. Victoria did not see the cameras. She only saw me, the obstacle she thought she could beat into submission. Then, a rhythmic tapping sound broke the silence. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a cane hitting the marble floor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. My grandmother, Evelyn Rowan, was standing up. She had not stood up on her own in 2 years, but tonight, she rose with a terrifying, regal strength. She walked slowly, purposefully, toward us. Her face was devoid of the frailty she had projected all evening. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and cold as steel. Victoria rushed toward her, grabbing her arm. "Mom, oh Mom, I am so sorry you had to see that. Cassidy was being hysterical. I had to stop her. I did it for us, for the family." Evelyn pulled her arm away from Victoria's grasp. It was a small movement, but it was a rejection so absolute it felt like another slap. Evelyn did not look at me. She looked only at Victoria. She did not shout. She did not scold. The room held its breath. "I just have one question. Vicky," Evelyn said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. The air grew heavy, charged with the electricity of a storm about to break. "One question," Evelyn repeated, staring into the eyes of the woman who thought she had won, to understand why that slap at the country club felt less like a shock and more like a punctuation mark at the end of a long sentence. "You have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand the silence of a wooden house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, where the rain never seemed to stop and the air always smelled of damp pine needles and my father's dark roast coffee. My childhood before Victoria was not a tragedy. It was quiet, certainly, but it was warm. My biological mother was a soft-spoken woman who loved gardening and old mystery novels. She taught me that patience was a virtue, a lesson I would unknowingly weaponize decades later. But when I was 10 years old, cancer took her from us in a span of 6 brutal months. Her death hollowed out my father, Daniel Rowan. He was a good man, but he was weak in the way that ivy is weak. He needed a structure to cling to, or he would wither on the ground. Without my mother, he poured himself into his work at Everpine Lodges, leaving me to navigate the echoing silence of our home alone. Then came Victoria. She arrived 2 years later, sweeping into our gray, rain-soaked lives like a neon sign in a cathedral. She was a public relations specialist hired by the Everpine board to refresh the brand, and she decided her first project would be my father. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with blonde hair that never frizzed in the humidity and a smile that looked perfect from every angle. She made my father laugh for the first time in years. I wanted to love her for that. I really did. I remember the weeks leading up to their wedding. I was 12 years old, desperate to be helpful, desperate to be part of this new, happy version of the Rowan family. I spent hours painting welcome signs and carrying boxes of decorations. I wanted to show her that I was not just baggage, I was a daughter. One afternoon, Victoria found me in the living room, arranging flowers for the rehearsal dinner. She watched me for a long moment, her head tilted to the side, a look of pitying amusement on her face. "Oh, Cassidy," she sighed, walking over to smooth a stray hair from my forehead. "You really are trying so hard, aren't you? It is sweet." "I just want it to be nice," I said, beaming. "It is nice," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But maybe you should go change before the guests arrive. That dress makes you look a bit washed out. We do not want people thinking we do not take care of you, do we? It would make your father look bad." She did not hit me. She did not yell. She simply planted a seed of shame in my chest and watered it with a smile. That was Victoria's gift. She could devastate you while looking like she was doing you a favor. By the time I was 13, the gaslighting had become the background radiation of my life. Victoria never criticized me directly. It was always framed as concern. If I laughed too loud, I was being hysterical. If I disagreed with her, I was being difficult. If I cried because I missed my mother, I was told I was being ungrateful to the woman who had stepped in to raise me. "You are just so sensitive, Cassidy," she would say, sighing as she poured my father another glass of wine. "You take everything so personally. It is exhausting for your father. Look at him. Do you want to make him tired?" And that was the lock on my mouth. Do not make Dad tired. My father was already a ghost of himself, deferring to Victoria on everything from what we ate for dinner to where we went on vacation. I learned to shrink, to flatten myself against the walls, to be as low maintenance as the furniture. Then Brianna was born. If I was the rough draft, Bree was the masterpiece. When Bree arrived, the dynamic in the house shifted from uneasy truce to blatant hierarchy. Victoria finally had a child who looked like her, a child she could mold from scratch without the baggage of a dead woman's DNA. We moved to a larger house in a more upscale neighborhood. Bree got the master suite on the second floor, a room filled with so much pink tulle it looked like a confectionery shop. I was given the smaller guest room down the hall, which was fine, except that it slowly became the storage room for Bree's overflow. "Cassidy doesn't mind," Victoria would tell the guests. "She is so low-key. She prefers a simple space." I became the built-in babysitter. I changed diapers. I warmed bottles. I rocked Bree to sleep, while Victoria hosted dinner parties downstairs to climb the social ladder of Portland's elite. I did not hate Bree. It was impossible to hate a baby, but I hated how my existence seemed to shrink in direct proportion to her growth. The holidays were the worst. Victoria was obsessed with the Rowan family Christmas card. Every year, we would dress up in coordinating outfits, and every year, the photographer, hired and directed by Victoria, would position us the same way. Daniel and Victoria in the center, seated on a velvet bench, with Bree on Victoria's lap, glowing like a cherub. And me? I was always directed to stand behind the bench, or off to the side, or sometimes to hold the family dog. One year, when I was 16, the photographer looked through the lens and frowned. "The composition is a bit off. The girl on the left is casting a shadow on the mother. Can we move her back a bit?" "Just step back, Cassidy," Victoria said brightly, not even looking at me. "Out of the light, honey. Let Bree shine." I stepped back until I was barely in the frame. When the cards were printed, I looked like a neighbor who had accidentally wandered into the shot. Victoria sent out 500 copies. The only person who saw me, truly saw me, was my grandmother, Evelyn. Evelyn Rowan was a force of nature. She had built Everpine lodges from a single cabin into an empire, and she had done it with grit, not charm. She lived in the main lodge on Mount Hood, a 2-hour drive from us. In the summers, she would invite me up for weeks at a time. Those were the only weeks I could breathe. At the lodge, nobody cared about my clothes or my sensitivity. Evelyn taught me how to read a balance sheet and how to chop wood. She treated me like an adult, not a project that needed fixing. On my 16th birthday, while Victoria and my father were busy planning a half-birthday party for 3-year-old Bree, Evelyn drove down to see me. She found me sitting on the back porch, reading a book on coding logic. She handed me a small, heavy box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a brass compass. It was old, scratched, and smelled of oxidation. "It belonged to your grandfather," Evelyn said, her voice raspy from years of smoking. "It does not look like much, but it works. It always points north, no matter how much you spin it around." I ran my thumb over the cool metal. "Thank you, Grandma." "You are going to feel lost, Cassidy," she said, looking me dead in the eye. "That woman, she sucks the air out of the room. I see it. Do not think I do not see it. But you have a true north. You just have to trust your own gut, not the lies people tell you about yourself. When you feel lost, remember you always have a way home." I kept that compass in my pocket every single day. It was a physical reminder that I existed, that I had a history before Victoria. But Victoria was not stupid. She saw the bond forming. She realized that Evelyn was the one person she could not charm and the one person who held the keys to the family fortune. She began to cut the cord. "Grandma is getting old, Cassidy," Victoria would say with feigned sadness. "She is confused. She tells you things that aren't true. I do not want you bothering her. She needs her rest." Calls were blocked. Letters were intercepted. When I asked to visit, Victoria would claim that Evelyn was having a bad spell and did not want visitors. It was a slow, surgical isolation. Victoria planted the idea in my father's head that Evelyn was becoming senile and that I was taking advantage of her confusion. "Mom says you asked Mother for money," my father said to me once, looking disappointed. "I never asked for money," I protested. "Victoria says you did," he replied, rubbing his temples. "Just stop stressing everyone out. Cassidy, please." I stopped fighting. I realized that words were useless in a house where the dictionary was written by my stepmother. Instead, I turned to a language she could not manipulate: code. School was my escape. I was good at math, but I was brilliant at systems. I liked computers because they were honest. If a line of code was wrong, the program failed. It did not gaslight you. It did not tell you that you were imagining the error. It just showed you the bug, and you fixed it. I joined the computer club. I spent my lunch breaks in the server room helping the IT admin. I started fixing laptops for extra cash. The teachers saw my potential. They told me I could go to MIT, to Stanford. But when I brought home my report card, straight A's in advanced placement calculus and computer science, Victoria would barely glance at it. "That is nice, Cassidy," she would say, turning her attention back to Bree's finger painting. "But you know, being smart is not everything. Boys do not like girls who are too intense. You are so cold sometimes, like a robot. You really need to work on your people skills if you want to survive in the real world." "She is right, Cass," my father would add, echoing his wife like a hollow chamber. "You spend too much time in that garage. It is not healthy." The garage, that was my kingdom. It was damp. It smelled of gasoline and dust. But it was mine. I had set up a workbench in the corner, piled high with scavenged motherboards, tangled wires, and monitors I had rescued from the recycling center. I spent my evenings out there, the blue glow of the screen illuminating my face as I taught myself Python, C++, and the architecture of networks. I learned how to break into systems just to see how they were built, and then I learned how to patch them up. One rainy Tuesday in November, when I was 17, I came home to find Victoria standing in the middle of the living room, holding a stack of my college brochures. She had opened my mail. "I threw them out," she said casually. "What?" I dropped my backpack. "Those were my applications." "We cannot afford to send you to these places, Cassidy," she said, adjusting a vase of lilies. "And frankly, I do not think you are ready to be that far away. You are too emotionally unstable. Look at how upset you are getting right now." "I am upset because you threw away my mail." "See?" She pointed a manicured finger at me. "Always the victim. Your father and I have discussed it. There is a community college 20 minutes away. You can go there, live at home, and help with Bree. It is better for everyone." I looked at my father. He was sitting in his armchair, reading the paper, refusing to meet my eyes. He had given up. He had traded his spine for a quiet life. That was the moment the steel entered my soul. I did not scream. I did not cry. I walked past her, went out to the garage, and locked the door. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the rain hammer against the metal roof. I touched the compass in my pocket. North. I thought, find your own north. I realized then that I was not a member of this family. I was an employee they were trying to keep on a permanent unpaid internship. Victoria did not want me to stay because she loved me. She wanted me to stay because she wanted to control me. She wanted to keep me small so Bree could look big. I turned on my Frankenstein computer. The fan whirred to life, a sound that felt more like a heartbeat than my own. I opened a new browser window and started searching for scholarships that did not require parental financial statements. I looked for jobs in Seattle. I looked for a way out. They thought I was in the garage sulking. They thought I was the cold, ungrateful stepdaughter, hiding from the warmth of their perfect family. They did not know that I was building a life raft. I stopped arguing at the dinner table. I stopped trying to be in the photos. I became the ghost they always treated me as. I worked in silence, hoarding every dollar I made from fixing neighbors' Wi-Fi, hiding the cash inside the casing of an old desktop tower where Victoria would never look. The seeds of my independence were not planted in sunlight. They were planted in the dark, damp corner of a garage, watered by the resentment of a girl who realized that if she wanted a seat at the table, she would have to build her own table in a different house, in a different city, entirely from scratch. I looked at the screen, the cursor blinking steadily. It was the only thing in the house that waited for my command. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "If I am cold, then I will be cold. I will be ice, and ice breaks things." This was not yet revenge. I was too young for revenge. This was survival. But looking back, I know that was the year Cassidy Rowan died, and the woman who would eventually stand in that ballroom in Denver began to take shape. They thought they were breaking me, but they were just forging me, and they had no idea what kind of weapon they were creating in their own garage. The acceptance letter from the University of Washington came in a thin white envelope that usually signaled rejection, but inside was a single sheet of heavy paper confirming a full academic scholarship to their computer science program. I read it 3 times standing by the mailbox at the end of our driveway, the drizzle soaking through my hoodie. I felt a sensation I had not experienced in years. It was not just happiness, it was the click of a lock opening. When I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, my father glanced at it over the rim of his coffee mug. "That is good, honey," he said, his voice distracted. "Seattle is not too far. You can come home on weekends to help with the garden." Victoria walked in, flipping through a magazine. She picked up the letter, scanned it with a faint frown, and dropped it back onto the counter as if it were a flyer for a discount grocery store. "Computer science," she mused. "It is a very male field. Cassidy, are you sure you are cut out for that kind of aggression? You know how you get when people raise their voices. I just do not want you to crash and burn when the pressure gets too high. Maybe a smaller state college would be safer." "I can handle it," I said, taking the letter back. "Well, do not expect a parade," she said, opening the fridge. "We are saving for Bree's art camp in Italy next summer, so if you are going, you are on your own for living expenses. We cannot have you draining the family resources just to prove a point." There was no graduation party. On the night of my high school commencement, we went to a mid-range chain restaurant where Victoria complained that her steak was overcooked. My father paid the bill, and we went home. That was it. That was the end of my childhood. The day I left for Seattle, the house was quiet. Victoria had taken Bree shopping for school clothes, and my father was at the office. I packed my life into the trunk of a rusted Honda Civic I had bought with my repair money. It did not take long. I did not have much to take. I was checking the oil level one last time when a gravelly voice spoke from behind me. "You checked the tire pressure?" I turned around. My grandmother, Evelyn, was standing by the edge of the garage. I had not heard her car pull up. She looked older than I remembered, leaning heavily on a cane, but her eyes were sharp. "Yes, Grandma," I said. 32 psi all around." She nodded, approving. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. She jammed it into the front pocket of my backpack before I could protest. "I know you have the scholarship," she said, "but books cost money, rent costs money, and freedom costs the most of all." "Victoria will be angry if she knows," I whispered. "Victoria is not here," Evelyn said, "and Victoria does not own me, despite what she thinks." She reached out and gripped my shoulder. Her fingers were strong. "Listen to me, Cassidy. You are going to go up there, and you are going to work harder than anyone else in the room, but do not let them make you feel small. You do not owe anyone the duty of being small, not your father, and certainly not that woman." I hugged her, smelling the familiar scent of lavender and old paper. "I will make you proud." "You already have," she said. "Now go, before I start crying and embarrass us both." I drove north on Interstate 5, watching the Oregon trees blur into Washington rain. I did not look back. Life in Seattle was a cold plunge into reality. My scholarship covered tuition, but rent in the city was astronomical. I found a studio apartment in the basement of a house in the University District. It smelled of mildew and the heating was temperamental, but it had a high-speed internet connection, which was all I cared about. I did not have the luxury of the typical college experience. While my peers were going to fraternity parties or rushing sororities, I was working 3 jobs. I worked the help desk at the university library from 6 in the morning until 10. I attended classes until 3. Then I spent my evenings running a freelance repair service out of my backpack, fixing spilled lattes on MacBooks and removing viruses from the laptops of panicked freshmen. I ate instant noodles. I bought clothes from thrift stores. I slept 5 hours a night, and I loved every second of it. For the first time in my life, my fatigue was my own. I was not tired because I was managing Victoria's moods. I was tired because I was building my future. The holidays were the hardest. Thanksgiving and Christmas came and went, and I stayed in Seattle. Victoria would send a text message, usually a group chat blast that included me as an afterthought. "Merry Christmas from the Rowans. Hope you are warm up there." I would spend Christmas Eve in the server room of a small logistics company where I had picked up a contract gig monitoring their network traffic. The hum of the cooling fans was my carol. I sat on the floor, eating a sandwich from a gas station, watching the blinking green lights of the server racks. I told myself that loneliness was just the price of admission. It was during those long, silent nights that I discovered my true talent. I was not just good at fixing computers, I was a savant at security. I could look at a stream of data logs and see the patterns that others missed. I could spot a breach attempt in the rhythm of the packets like a musician spots a wrong note in a symphony. Reading code felt like reading a secret history of the world. My break came in my junior year. I was doing freelance consulting for a scrappy fintech startup in downtown Seattle. One afternoon, their lead developer went pale. They were being hit by a massive distributed denial of service attack, and someone was trying to inject a script to siphon off user data. The room was in panic. The CEO was shouting. The senior engineers were freezing up. I sat down at a terminal. I did not ask for permission. I just started typing. My fingers flew across the keys. I rerouted the traffic through a series of dummy servers, isolated the malicious script, and traced the IP signature back to a botnet in Eastern Europe. I patched the vulnerability in the SQL database and locked the door, all in under 20 minutes. When I looked up, the room was silent. The CEO, a man named Marcus, was staring at me. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am the intern," I said. 2 days later, Marcus introduced me to the head of recruitment at Northbridge Dynamics, one of the largest defense and cybersecurity contractors on the West Coast. I did not even have to interview. They looked at the logs from the attack I had stopped and hired me on the spot as a junior analyst. By the time I graduated, I was a full-time security architect. Northbridge was a different world. The office was a glass fortress overlooking the Puget Sound. The work was high stakes. We protected hospital networks, shipping logistics for global supply chains, and proprietary data for biotech firms. One mistake could cost lives or billions of dollars. I thrived in the pressure. I worked 80-hour weeks. I became known as the ghost among my team because I was always there, silently patching holes before the clients even knew they were bleeding. I did not have a social life. I did not have a boyfriend. I had the code. Back in Portland, life went on without me. Through the lens of social media, I watched the Victoria show continue. Bree graduated high school and was accepted into a prestigious art institute, funded entirely by my father. Victoria posted photos of Bree's senior showcase, Bree's new convertible, Bree's vacation to Cabo. I was slowly erased from the family narrative. In the photos on the mantelpiece that occasionally appeared in the background of Victoria's selfies, the frames that used to hold my school pictures were gone, replaced by shots of Bree and Victoria winning a mother-daughter charity pageant. My father called once every 2 months. The conversations were always the same. "Hi, honey. How is the computer thing going?" he would ask. "It is going well, Dad," I just got promoted to senior lead. That is nice, he would say, clearly not understanding what that meant. Listen, your mom, Victoria, she has been having these terrible migraines lately. The stress of the business is really getting to her. We are thinking of remodeling the kitchen to cheer her up. Do you think you could come down for Easter? She says she misses you. She did not miss me. She missed having a punching bag. I cannot, Dad, I would say. I have to work. You work too much, he would sigh. You are going to burn out. You should try to be more like Bree. She knows how to enjoy life. I hung up the phone and looked at my triple monitor setup, at the lines of code that protected the medical records of 3 million people in the Pacific Northwest. I am not like Bree, I thought, and thank God for that. Then came the offer. Northbridge Dynamics was preparing to go public, but before the IPO, they offered a round of preferred stock options to key employees. It was a buy-in, a gamble. You had to use your own money to purchase the shares at a strike price, betting that the value would go up. The price was steep, to buy the maximum amount allowed for my level. I would have to empty my savings account, everything I had scraped together from 3 years of eating ramen and fixing laptops. I did not call my father for advice. I called a colleague in the risk assessment department. We looked at the upcoming contracts, specifically, a pending deal with a national hospital network that I had personally helped secure the architecture for. If this deal signs, he told me, the valuation triples overnight. I went to the bank the next morning. My hands were shaking as I signed the wire transfer. I drained my account down to the last $500. I bought every single share I could get my hands on. 6 months later, the hospital contract was signed. Northbridge Dynamics went public on the NASDAQ. I was sitting at my desk, drinking lukewarm coffee, when the opening bell rang in New York. I refreshed my portfolio page. The numbers spun and settled. I blinked. I refreshed the page again. The number was real. The stock had opened at 4 times my buy-in price. In the span of a morning, my net worth had jumped from $500 to over $2 million. I sat back in my ergonomic chair. The office buzzed around me. People were cheering, popping champagne in the break room. I did not cheer. I felt a profound, quiet stillness. I was 25 years old. I was a millionaire, and nobody in my family knew. To them, I was still Cassidy the Grind, the worker bee living in a rainy city, barely scraping by on a tech support salary. They assumed I lived in a small apartment because I had to. They did not know I stayed in my modest one-bedroom in Capitol Hill because I preferred the anonymity. I did not go out and buy a sports car. I did not buy a penthouse. I paid off my student loans in a single keystroke. I hired a high-end tax attorney and a wealth management firm, the kind that usually only took clients with last names like Gates or Bezos, but made an exception for young liquidity. I began to build a fortress, not of stone, but of paper. I diversified my assets. I bought into index funds, municipal bonds, and real estate trusts. I learned the language of money just as I had learned the language of Python. I kept my job at Northbridge because I loved the work, but the dynamic had changed. I no longer worked because I was afraid of starving. I worked because I was good at it. I sent an email to my grandmother that week. Dear Grandma, the compass is working. I found north. I am safe. I am going to be okay. Actually, I am going to be better than okay. Love, Cassidy. I did not tell her about the money. Not yet. I knew that if Victoria caught wind of my wealth, the dynamic would shift instantly. She would not respect me. She would try to harvest me. She would suddenly remember how much she loved her stepdaughter. She would need investments for Bree's Gallery, for the house, for Everpine. No, my silence was my shield. So when I went home for Christmas that year, I drove a rented Ford Focus. I wore my old coat. I let Victoria make snide comments about my simple life and how lucky Bree was to have a mother who taught her about the finer things. Do not worry, Cassidy, Victoria said, patting my hand as she showed off a diamond bracelet Daniel had bought her. Not everyone is meant to be wealthy. Some people are just meant to work. It is honest. It suits you. I took a sip of my water. feeling the warmth of the secret burning pleasantly in my chest. "You are right, Victoria," I said, my voice steady. "It suits me just fine." I watched her preen, unaware that the woman sitting across from her could buy and sell her entire wardrobe without checking her bank balance. I had built a weapon in the dark, and for the first time, I realized that the greatest revenge was not burning their house down. It was buying the land underneath it and waiting for the lease to expire. It started with a mistake, not a grand conspiracy or a whistleblower meeting in a parking garage, but a simple, mundane clerical error made by an overworked accountant. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was at my desk at Northbridge Dynamics, analyzing a threat vector for a logistics client, when my personal notification feed pinged. It was an alert from an old email account. My university address from the University of Washington. I barely checked it anymore, keeping it active only for alumni newsletters and legacy logins, but the subject line caught my eye immediately. Everpine Lodges, Q3, Financial Summary, Confidential. I frowned, setting down my coffee mug. I had not done any work for Everpine since my sophomore year of college, when I had set up a basic inventory database for my grandmother as a class project. The current accountant, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who had been with the company since the Stone Age, must have started typing Rowan into the recipient field, and autocomplete had selected my old student address instead of my father's or Victoria's. My finger hovered over the delete key. The ethical thing to do, the good daughter thing to do, was to delete it and maybe send a polite note to Mrs. Gable telling her to check her distribution list. But I was not a good daughter. I was a security analyst, and when a door is left ajar, my instinct is not to close it. It is to peek inside. I clicked the attachment. The spreadsheet opened, a dense grid of numbers and categories. At first glance, it looked healthy. Revenue was up. Occupancy rates for the winter season were projecting high. But then my eyes drifted to the expense column. There were the usual line items: linen services, food suppliers, landscaping, property taxes, and then, buried in the middle of the administrative consultants section, there was a recurring payment to a vendor I did not recognize. V&R Horizons, LLC. The amount was $12,500, paid out monthly. I sat up straighter. $12,500 a month was a significant retainer for a consultancy firm. I scrolled back through the previous quarters included in the summary. The payments had been steady for 2 years, but recently, they had spiked. In August, there was an additional project fee of $45,000. In September, another lump sum of $30,000. I opened a new terminal window on my second monitor. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the familiar clack-clack sound grounding me. I ran a search on the Washington Secretary of State's business registry for V&R Horizons, LLC. The results populated in less than a second. Entity name: V&R Horizons, LLC. Filing date: 3 years ago. Registered agent: Victoria A. Rowan. Mailing address: a post office box in Lake Oswego, a wealthy suburb of Portland. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. Victoria. V&R, Victoria and Rowan, or maybe Victoria and retirement. I leaned back, staring at the screen. My stepmother had set up a shell company and was billing my grandmother's business for consulting. But what consulting? Victoria did not have a business degree. She had worked in PR 20 years ago, but her primary occupation since marrying my father had been shopping and hosting dinner parties. I needed to know where the money was going. I pulled up the metadata from the payment schedule and cross-referenced it with my own private database, a folder I kept named The Victoria Show, where I archived screenshots of her public social media posts. It was a masochistic habit I had developed years ago, keeping tabs on the life I was excluded from. I pulled up the entry for August 14th. On the financial statement, Everpine had wired $45,000 to V&R Horizons for strategic brand development. On Instagram, on August 16th, Victoria had posted a photo of herself and Bree standing on the deck of a private yacht in the Mediterranean. The caption read, Sometimes you just have to treat your girls to a well-deserved break. Capri is calling. Blessed family first. I checked the September entry, a $30,000 charge for digital infrastructure audit. On September 20th, Bree had posted a TikTok video of a brand new cherry red convertible with a big white bow on the hood. The caption, "Mom is literally the best. Early birthday present." My stomach turned. They were not just spending the profits, they were siphoning the operating capital. These were not dividends. These were disguised business expenses, meaning they were tax fraud on top of embezzlement. And my grandmother? Evelyn Rowan was sharp, but she was 80. She trusted family. She trusted my father. And by extension, she trusted the viper he had married. If Mrs. Gable questioned the expenses, Victoria likely waved her hand and said it was for modernization or essential branding, using buzzwords that sounded important enough to shut down inquiry. I stood up and paced the small length of my office. This was it. This was the smoking gun. But then the reality set in. What could I do with this? If I called my father, he would panic. He would go straight to Victoria and ask, "Honey, Cassidy says you are stealing," and Victoria would laugh. She would produce fake invoices, fake reports, glossy binders full of nonsense about brand synergy. She would tell him I was jealous, that I was hacking into private files, that I was trying to destroy the family because I was bitter. My father, who hated conflict more than he loved the truth, would believe her. He would help her bury it just to make the shouting stop. And if I went to Grandma? Without concrete proof, it would just be my word against Victoria's. Victoria was there every day, pouring tea, fluffing pillows, whispering in Evelyn's ear about how unstable and distant Cassidy was. I needed more. I needed undeniable, irrefutable proof. I needed to see the endgame. I sat back down and cracked my knuckles. "Okay, Victoria," I whispered. "You want to play digital hide-and-seek? Let us play." I did not hack the bank. That would be illegal and traceable. Instead, I used open-source intelligence techniques. I looked for the weak links. Victoria was tech illiterate, but she was arrogant, which was a hacker's favorite combination. I found her personal email address on a leaked database from a luxury shopping site breach 3 years prior. The password she had used then was Queen Vicky 1970. I tried a variation of that on a public cloud storage service, where she hosted the images for her charity events. I typed in Queen Vicky 1975. Access denied. I tried Bree. Is perfect. Access denied. I thought about what mattered to her. Status, the house, the address. I typed Rowan Manor 01. The folder unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was in her personal cloud drive. Most of it was mundane. Wedding photos, diet plans, scans of Bree's report cards. But there was a folder labeled simply legal. I opened it. Inside were PDF drafts, hundreds of them. But the most recent one, dated just 2 weeks ago, made my blood run cold. Draft. Last will and testament of Evelyn Rose Rowan. Amended. I opened the file. It was a scanned document, heavily marked up in red ink. Victoria's handwriting. I scrolled to the section on executive control. The original text, crossed out, had listed a board of trustees. The new text, written in the margins in Victoria's sharp, angular script, read, "Due to declining health, full power of attorney and executive guardianship of the Everpine estate shall be transferred to Victoria Rowan immediately upon signature to ensure continuity of care." And further down, in the beneficiary section, "To my granddaughter Cassidy Rowan, I leave the sum of $10,000, a token of affection, with the hope she finds her own way." $10,000, out of an estate worth millions. It was not about the money, it was the dismissal. It was the final erasure. The document was designed to cut me out completely, to legally declare that I was nothing more than a charity case. But the guardianship clause was the terrifying part. Victoria was not just waiting for Evelyn to die. She was planning to have Evelyn declared incompetent. Once she had power of attorney, she could sell the lodges, liquidate the assets, and put Grandma in a home, all while claiming it was for her own good. I looked at the timestamp on the file. It had been sent to a lawyer named S. Lanner. I quickly researched Lanner. He was a strip mall attorney with a history of malpractice suits. Exactly the kind of shady operator Victoria would use because a reputable firm would ask too many questions about why the beneficiary was drafting the will. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, clarifying rage. For years, I had told myself that living well was the best revenge. I had told myself that my silence was dignity. I had built my fortress of money and success in Seattle and told myself I was safe. But I was wrong. While I was building my walls, they were dismantling the foundation of my home. They were going to steal my grandmother's legacy, the woman who gave me the compass, the only person who had ever told me I did not have to be small. I could not just email this to the police. It was a draft. It was not signed. Victoria could claim it was just notes. She could claim she never intended to execute it. I needed to catch her in the act. I needed to be there. I checked the calendar. The big 80th birthday party in Denver was 3 weeks away. Victoria was planning to use that event as her coronation. That was likely when she planned to have Evelyn sign the papers, framed as a restructuring to save the company. I picked up my phone. I did not call my father. I did not call Victoria. I called the general manager of the Everpine Lodge on Mount Hood, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had taught me how to fish when I was 12. "Hello, Cassidy?" he answered, sounding surprised. "Is everything all right?" "Hi, Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice professional and bright. "Everything is great. Listen, I have been looking at some of the digital infrastructure reports for the lodges. I know Grandma has been worried about data security lately, especially with all the hacks in the news. I have some free time next week. I was thinking of driving down to do a pro bono audit, just to upgrade the firewalls, make sure the guest data is safe, a birthday gift to the company." "Oh, that would be wonderful," Mr. Henderson said. "Your grandmother is up here at the main lodge this week. She would be tickled pink to see you. But, well, you know Mrs. Victoria usually handles the contractors." "I am not a contractor. Mr. Henderson," I said. "I am family, and it is a surprise. Do not tell Victoria. I want to just show up and get the work done before the party, so it is one less thing for her to worry about." "I understand," he said. "I will keep it under my hat. When can we expect you?" "Tomorrow night," I said. I packed a bag. I packed my clothes, my high-end laptop, and a portable secure server. I also packed the compass Evelyn had given me. The drive from Seattle to Mount Hood took 4 hours. As I left the city, the rain turned from a drizzle to a downpour. I watched the landscape change from gray concrete to the deep, dark green of the Douglas firs. I turned off the radio. I needed the silence. As the elevation climbed, the air grew thinner and colder. I remembered the first time I made this drive alone, running away to college with Evelyn's cash in my pocket. I had been a frightened girl then, desperate to escape. Now, I was driving a car worth $80,000, wearing a watch that cost more than Victoria's first engagement ring, and carrying a hard drive that could burn their entire world to the ground. I thought about the check for $12,500. I thought about the yacht in the Mediterranean. I thought about Bree's convertible. And I thought about my mother, the first Mrs. Rowan, who had planted the hydrangeas in the garden that Victoria had dug up the week after the funeral. Victoria thought she had won. She thought she had successfully pruned the family tree until only she and her daughter remained. She thought I was just a glitch in the system, a redundant line of code that she had deleted. She had no idea that she had not deleted me. She had just pushed me into the background processes, and now I was about to execute the root command. I pulled up to the gate of the Everpine Lodge. The massive timber structure glowed warm and golden against the twilight. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. But as I drove up the winding driveway, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. I was not coming here to bake cookies. I was coming here to start a war. The slap that would happen in the ballroom in Denver was still weeks away, but the fuse was lit right there, in the quiet hum of my engine as I killed the lights and rolled to a stop in the shadow of the pines. I was done being the victim. I was done being the stepdaughter. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked just like Evelyn's. "Ready or not," I whispered. The fire in the stone hearth crackled, sending sparks drifting up into the dark chimney of the main lodge. My grandmother, Evelyn Rowan, sat in her high-backed leather armchair, a wool blanket draped over her legs. Her hands, thin and mapped with blue veins, rested still on the armrests. To an outsider, she looked like a frail old woman waiting for the end. But I knew better. I looked at her eyes. They were alert, scanning me with the precision of a hawk spotting movement in the grass. I had walked into the room 5 minutes ago, carrying my laptop case in a thick manila folder. I had started with the script I had rehearsed in the car, babbling about firewall upgrades, server latency, and the need to protect guest credit card data. I was talking too fast. I was using technical jargon as a shield, hiding behind the language of machines because the language of family had failed me for so long. Evelyn let me talk for a full 2 minutes without blinking. Then she raised one hand, palm out, and silence fell over the room. "Cassidy," she said. Her voice was raspier than I remembered, but the authority was intact. "You did not drive 4 hours through a rainstorm to talk to me about bandwidth. Put the computer down and tell me why you are shaking." I froze. I looked down at my hands. She was right. They were trembling. I set the laptop on the heavy oak coffee table. I tried to maintain my composure, the professional mask I wore at Northbridge Dynamics, but the atmosphere of the lodge, the smell of pine, the sound of the wind outside, the sheer weight of the memories here, cracked it open. "I am tired, Grandma," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," she said softly. "Sit." I sat on the ottoman in front of her, and suddenly, the dam broke. It was not the financial fraud that came out first. It was the hurt. It was 20 years of holding my breath. "I tried," I said, the words tumbling out. "I tried so hard to be the daughter they wanted. I tried to be quiet. I tried to be invisible so Victoria would not get mad. But it was never enough. She erased Mom from the photos. She made Dad think I was crazy. She told everyone I was cold and unfeeling. But I only became cold because it was the only way to survive in that house without shattering." I looked up at her, tears finally spilling over. "And I thought you believed her. I thought you believed I was the bad seed." Evelyn looked at me for a long time. The fire popped. She reached out and placed her cold hand on my cheek. "I never believed her," she said, "but I was waiting." "Waiting for what?" "I was waiting for the day you would stop trying to please them and start fighting for yourself," Evelyn said. "I saw what she was doing. Cassidy, the little comments, the way she pushed you to the edge of the pictures. I saw your father shrink until he was just a shadow of the man my son used to be. But I knew that if I intervened too soon, if I fought your battles for you, she would just twist it. She would make herself the victim. I needed you to be strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me." She leaned back, her eyes hardening. "Now, dry your face. You are a Rowan. We do not break. We rebuild. You brought files. Open them." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and took a deep breath. The emotional purge had cleared my head. I was no longer the hurt child. I was the analyst. I opened the folder and spread the documents out on the coffee table. "I found these by accident," I said, my voice steadying. "This is a financial summary that was emailed to my old university account. It shows monthly payments of $12,500 to a company called V&R Horizons LLC. Evelyn picked up the paper, adjusting her reading glasses. V&R, Victoria and Rowan. "Exactly," I said. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. I did a deep dive. The LLC is registered to Victoria. The payments are categorized as consulting, brand development, and strategic oversight, but there is no consulting happening. Grandma, the payment dates align perfectly with her vacations. See this one? $45,000 in August. That was the week she rented the yacht in Italy. Evelyn studied the screen, her face unreadable. She flipped through the pages I had printed. The bank transfers, the shell company registration, the cross-referenced social media posts showing Bree and Victoria spending the money as fast as it came in. $3.4 million, I said. That is the total over the last 5 years. She is bleeding the company dry. I expected Evelyn to gasp, to clutch her chest, to deny it. Instead, she let out a long, weary sigh and took off her glasses. I knew the numbers were wrong, she murmured. I asked Daniel about the shrinking profit margins last year. He told me it was the economy. He told me the cost of labor had gone up. He showed me reports. She doctored the reports, Grandma, I said gently. Or she had someone do it for her. I suspected, Evelyn admitted, but suspicion is not proof, and without proof, accusing a daughter-in-law who has convinced the world she is a saint, well, that makes an old woman look senile. She has been isolating me, Cassidy, blocking my calls, filtering my mail, telling me that you were too busy to visit. She drafted a new will, I said. This was the hardest part. I pulled out the final document. I found this on her private cloud drive. She plans to have you sign this at the birthday party. It grants her full executive guardianship. It declares you incompetent to manage the estate due to declining health. Once you sign this, she can put you in a home and sell the lodges. Evelyn took the document. Her hand shook slightly, not from age, but from rage. She read the clause about the guardianship. Then she read the section about me, the $10,000 token inheritance. She looked up, and the steel in her eyes was terrifying. She thinks I am a sheep, Evelyn said quietly. She thinks she can shear me and then lead me to the slaughter. She is wrong, I said. Yes, Evelyn said. She is very wrong. She reached for the phone on the side table. Get me a pen, Cassidy, and find the number for Highland and Associates in Seattle, not Lanner. I am never speaking to Lanner again. What are we going to do? I asked. We are going to rewrite the rules of the game, Evelyn said. But we are going to do it quietly. If we confront her now, she will destroy the evidence. She will claim these were authorized expenses. She will claim she was managing my money because I was confused. We need to catch her in a lie that she cannot spin her way out of. For the next 3 days, I did not leave the lodge. I told my team at Northbridge I had a family emergency. Evelyn and I turned the library into a war room. We met with a senior partner from Highland and Associates, a woman named Mrs. Vance, who flew down immediately when Evelyn mentioned the scope of the assets involved. We sat by the fire and drafted a new estate plan. I want to transfer the majority ownership of Everpine Lodges into a specialized, irrevocable trust, Evelyn instructed Mrs. Vance. Effective immediately. And the beneficiary? Mrs. Vance asked. The beneficiaries will be my son Daniel and my granddaughter Brianna, but with strict stipulations, Evelyn said. I looked up, surprised. You are leaving it to them? Wait, Evelyn said. She turned to the lawyer. However, the trust will have a protector, a supervisor with absolute veto power over all financial transactions and the ability to dissolve the beneficiary status of anyone found to have engaged in criminal activity against the estate. And who will be the supervisor? Mrs. Vance asked. Evelyn pointed at me. Cassidy Rowan. Grandma, I said, leaning forward, I do not want the money. If you give me the company, Victoria will say I manipulated you. She will say I am just as greedy as she is. I am not giving you the money. Cassidy, Evelyn said sharply, I am giving you the burden. You do not get the payouts. You get the control. You get the responsibility of making sure the employees get paid. The lodges stay open, and that nobody steals another dime. Can you handle that? I can, I said. But what about the rest? I do not want everything. I have my own money. I have my own career. That is why I trust you, Evelyn said, because you do not need this. Victoria needs this. Bree needs this because she has never been taught to work. You are free. That makes you dangerous. We finalized the structure. The Rowan Integrity Trust would hold the assets. If any beneficiary was proven to have embezzled funds or committed fraud, their share would be instantly forfeited and redirected to a charitable foundation for land conservation. "Now," Evelyn said, leaning back after the lawyer had left, "we have the trap. We need the bait." "The party," I said. "The party," she agreed. "The 80th birthday celebration in Denver. Victoria thinks it is her coronation. We are going to let her believe it. I want her to feel safe. I want her to feel so secure that she gets careless." "I can set up data traps," I suggested, my mind racing with the technical possibilities. "I can create a dummy email account that looks like it belongs to the bank. We can send her a confirmation of a transfer request, something that prompts her to reply and confirm the offshore account numbers. If she replies, we have proof of intent." "Do it," Evelyn said. "And I will play my part. I will be the tired, confused old woman. I will ask her for help. I will tell her I am ready to sign the power of attorney." "That is risky," I said. "If you sign the wrong paper—" "I will not sign anything until I am ready," Evelyn said. "But I need her to bring the papers to the party. I need her to present them to me in front of witnesses. I want her to be the one who initiates the transfer of power." "Why?" I asked. "Because," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "when I ask her the question, I want the answer to cost her everything. I do not want a private confession. Cassidy, she humiliated you privately for 20 years. She made you small in your own house. I want her to answer for it in front of the world she values so much." We spent the final evening going over the plan. I installed a keylogger on the computer in the lodge's office, knowing Victoria would use it when she arrived to check on preparations. I set up a mirrored server so that every email sent from the Everpine domain would be blindly copied to my secure account. I looked at my grandmother. She looked tired. Yes, but she also looked alive in a way I had not seen in years. The fight had returned to her. "One thing, Grandma," I said. "When the moment comes, when we drop the hammer, we cannot scream. We cannot look angry. If we look angry, we look like we are vindictive." "I agree," Evelyn said. "Cold. We must be cold." "Just the facts," I said. "The numbers, the dates, the truth." "And the question," Evelyn added. "I have been thinking about what to ask her." "Do not tell me," I said. "I want to be surprised too." Evelyn smiled, a small, dry curving of her lips. "It is not a complicated question, but I think it is the only one that matters." As I packed my car the next morning to drive back to Seattle, Evelyn stood on the porch. She leaned on her cane, the wind whipping her gray hair around her face. "Cassidy," she called out. I rolled down the window. "Yes?" "You were never replaced," she said. "You were just in reserve." I drove down the mountain with a lump in my throat, but my hands were steady on the wheel. The victim was gone. The stepdaughter was gone. I was the supervisor now, and I was driving straight into the eye of the storm to set the stage for the greatest performance of Victoria Rowan's life. I checked my phone. A notification popped up from my server. The trap was active. The keylogger was running. The stage was set. Victoria wanted a show. We were going to give her one, but she had forgotten the most important rule of theater. Never underestimate the person who controls the lighting, because when the spotlight hit her this time, there would be nowhere to hide. The invitations for the 80th birthday gala of Evelyn Rowan were printed on cream-colored cardstock so thick you could almost use it as a weapon. They arrived in mailboxes across the Pacific Northwest 2 weeks before the event, featuring gold leaf embossing and a professional portrait of my grandmother looking regal, albeit slightly digitally softened to hide the fatigue in her eyes. Underneath her name, in a font that screamed pretension, were the words, "Hosted by Daniel and Victoria Rowan, honoring a lifetime of legacy and the future of Everpine." I held the invitation in my hand in my Seattle apartment, running my thumb over the raised lettering. The narrative was already being spun. The future of Everpine was explicitly linked to Victoria's name. She was positioning herself not just as the hostess, but as the successor. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. I had not blocked Victoria. I needed to see what she was broadcasting to the world. She had posted a photo of herself standing on the grand staircase of the Denver Country Club, wearing a casual but expensive cashmere sweater, pointing at floral arrangements. The caption read, "So exhausted, but so happy. Organizing Mom's Big 8-0 is a full-time job, but she deserves the best. Someone has to make sure the legacy stays strong. Rowan Strong Dutiful, Daughter Legacy." I scrolled down. There were hundreds of comments. "You are a saint." Vicky. One friend wrote, "Evelyn is so lucky to have you." Wrote another. Then came the photo of Bree. My half-sister was wearing a shimmering silver dress, holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something off camera. The caption, "My baby girl is ready to step up. The next generation of leadership looks good in sparkles." I was nowhere to be found. I was not in the throwback photos. I was not in the preparation updates to the digital world. The Rowan family consisted of 3 people, Daniel, Victoria, and Bree. Evelyn was the prop, and I was the error that had been edited out. It was strange. A year ago, this would have crushed me. I would have sat in my dark living room, drinking cheap wine, wondering why I was not good enough to be included. But today, staring at the screen, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. Every post she made, every lie she told about her sacrifice, was just another shovel of dirt she was digging for her own grave. I set the phone down and turned to my laptop. I had work to do. While Victoria was busy curating the aesthetics of the party, I was curating the guest list, not the official one. She had already filled that with her socialite friends and business contacts she wanted to impress. I was focusing on the people she had forgotten. I pulled up a list of contacts, cousins, great-aunts, former business partners of my grandfather, who had been pushed out when Victoria took over the social calendar. I called my cousin Sarah first. Sarah was a teacher in Oregon who had been banned from family gatherings 5 years ago because she had once dared to tell Victoria that her gluten-free diet was a fad. "Cassidy," Sarah answered, sounding surprised. "I haven't heard from you in months." "I am calling about Grandma's birthday," I said. "Oh." Sarah's voice went flat. "Yeah, I saw the posts. I didn't get an invite, not that I expected one. Victoria probably thinks I would show up in sweatpants." "I want you to come," I said. "I have booked a room for you and Mark at the hotel across the street from the club. I bought your plane tickets. I am sending them to your email right now." "Cassidy, I can't," she sighed. "I don't want the drama. Victoria will throw a fit if she sees us. She will say we are crashing." "Let her throw a fit," I said, my voice steady. "Grandma wants you there. She specifically asked me to make sure the whole family was present. You are not crashing. Sarah, you are guests of honor. You just have to promise me one thing." "What?" "If things get heated, and they might, do not intervene," I said. "Do not try to argue with Victoria. Do not try to defend me. Just take out your phone and record. Can you do that?" There was a long pause on the other end. "Cassidy, what are you planning?" "I am planning to let people see the truth," I said. "Are you in?" "I will pack my bags," Sarah said. I made 5 more calls like that. I spent nearly $10,000 of my own money arranging travel and accommodation for the black sheep of the Rowan clan. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the people who knew the real history of this family to be in the room when the mask slipped. 3 days before the party, I flew to Denver. I did not stay at the family house, even though my father had offered the guest room in a half-hearted text message. I checked into the same hotel where I had booked my cousins, keeping a low profile. My first stop was the Denver Country Club. I walked in wearing my Northbridge Dynamics lanyard and a sharp black blazer, carrying a clipboard. Confidence is the best camouflage. I found the head of the audio-visual team, a guy named Dave who looked stressed about the lighting rig. "Hi, Dave," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "I am Cassidy Rowan, Evelyn's granddaughter. I work in cybersecurity. Grandma is a little paranoid about privacy given some high-profile guests attending." So she asked me to just do a quick sweep of the perimeter and the recording setup. Oh, sure, Dave said, wiping sweat from his forehead. We have standard CCTV, plus the event videographer, and we are live streaming to the member portal for those who couldn't make it. Perfect, I said. I need to make sure the feed is secure. Do you mind if I patch in a redundancy protocol? It just backs up the raw footage to a secure cloud server in real time. That way, if the power goes out or a card corrupts, we don't lose the speeches. That would actually be great, Dave said, looking relieved. I had a corrupt SD card last week, and the bride nearly killed me. If you want to back it up, be my friend. He led me to the control booth. It took me 10 minutes to set up the link. I routed every camera feed, the security cameras in the hall, the main event camera, and the roaming wireless camera, directly to my private server in Seattle. I also verified that the cameras covered the blind spots. I noted the corner near the buffet, the alcove near the stage. I visualized where Victoria would likely pull someone aside if she wanted to hiss a threat. I adjusted the angle of one of the security cameras on the wall just 2 degrees to the left. Looks good, I told Dave. Just one thing, no matter what happens, do not cut the feed. Even if there is a technical glitch on the screen, keep the recording running. We need everything for the archives. You got it, Dave said. As I was leaving the club, my phone rang. It was my father. I stared at the screen for a moment. Dad. The word felt heavy. I answered. Hello, Dad? Cassidy. He sounded tired, his voice thin and worn. You are in Denver? I just landed. I lied. I was standing in the parking lot of the venue. Listen, honey, he started, and I could hear the hesitation in his breath. Victoria is, well, she is very stressed. She wants this night to be perfect for your grandmother. She is worried that there might be tension. Tension? I asked innocently. You know how you two get, he said. She thinks you might be upset about the seating arrangement, or the speeches. She said you seemed hostile on the phone with Bree the other day. I had not spoken to Bree in 3 months. I am not hostile, Dad, I said. I am coming to celebrate Grandma's birthday. That is all. I know, he said quickly. But please, Cassidy, for me, just stay in the background. Do not bring up the past. Do not talk about your job or how much money you are making. It makes Victoria feel, well, she feels like you are trying to show her up. Just let her have this one night. She has worked so hard. I gripped the phone tight. He was doing it again, asking me to shrink so his wife could feel big, asking me to be a ghost so she could be the star. I will behave, Dad, I said. I promise I will not start a fight. I won't start it, I thought as I hung up, but I'm certainly going to finish it. Meanwhile, the cracks were starting to show in the perfect family Victoria was trying to project. I knew this because I was reading their emails. Bree was not as oblivious as she pretended to be. She was young, and she liked the money, but she was not stupid. Earlier that day, I had intercepted an email chain between Victoria and Mr. Lanner, the shady lawyer. The subject line was Asset Liquidation Timeline. Lanner had written, We need to move the liquid capital from the operating account to the Cayman entity before the end of the fiscal year. Once Evelyn signs the power of attorney on Saturday, we have a 48-hour window to execute the transfer before the quarterly audit flags it. Victoria had forwarded this to Bree with a note. Just so you know, we might be taking a little trip to the islands next month to sign some papers. Keep your schedule clear. But Bree had replied, asking a question that surprised me. Mom, why are we moving the money offshore? Is this for tax reasons? Is it legal? I do not want to get in trouble if I am listed on the board. Victoria's reply was swift and manipulative. Don't worry your pretty head about business. Sweetie, it is standard asset protection. I am doing this to secure your future, so you never have to work a boring job like your sister. Trust me. Bree had not replied to that. I sat in my hotel room, looking at the email on my screen. Bree was standing on the edge of a cliff. She saw the fog. She smelled the danger. But she was choosing to close her eyes because the view was too nice. She was complicit. Yes, but she was also a product of Victoria's grooming. I felt a pang of pity for her, but I pushed it down. Pity would not save the company. There was one final piece of the puzzle, a physical piece. I opened a video file from 2 weeks ago. It was footage from a small, motion-activated camera I had hidden on top of the bookshelf in the living room of my father's house during my last brief visit, ostensibly to pick up some old boxes. The video showed Victoria walking into the room. She looked around, checking if she was alone. She walked over to the antique jewelry box on the mantel. She opened a false bottom in the box and pulled out a silver USB drive. She held it for a moment, a look of triumph on her face, before tucking it back into the velvet lining. I did not know exactly what was on that drive, but based on her emails, it likely contained the unencrypted ledgers, the real numbers she was hiding from the IRS and the shareholders. It was her insurance, the master file she kept in case Lanner tried to double-cross her. She kept it close, in her house, believing it was the safest place on earth. She did not know the house had eyes. The night before the party, the air in Denver was crisp and cold. I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out at the city lights. The anticipation was a physical weight in my chest, a mixture of adrenaline and dread. My phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. "Hello, Grandma," I said. "Are you in the city?" she asked. Her voice was clear, strong. She sounded like the woman who had built an empire from nothing. "I am. Everything is set. The team at the club thinks I am just a helpful granddaughter. The data link is live. The lawyer, Mrs. Vance, is flying in tomorrow morning. She knows to stay out of sight until you signal." "And the family?" Evelyn asked. "Sarah and the others are here. They know the plan. Quiet, witness, record." "Good," Evelyn said. Then she paused. The silence stretched for a long moment. "Cassidy," she said softly, "tomorrow is going to be very hard. Victoria is going to say things that will hurt. She is going to try to break you in front of everyone. That is her only move left. When she feels cornered, she lashes out." "I know," I said. "Are you ready for that?" she asked. "Are you ready to be the villain in her story so you can be the hero in your own? Can you stand there and take it without crumbling?" I thought about the little girl in the garage, fixing computers in the dark. I thought about the teenager who was cropped out of photos. I thought about the woman who had built a fortune in silence while her family pitied her. I touched the scar on my thumb from a soldering iron burn I got when I was 19. It was a reminder that I could handle heat. "I am ready," I said. "Lanner, Victoria, the lies. I am ready for all of it. For the first time in my life, Grandma, I am not scared of her. She is just a user with a broken firewall, and I have the admin password." "Then sleep well, my dear," Evelyn said. "Tomorrow, we take back our house." I hung up. I did not sleep well. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the timeline in my head. 6 o'clock. Guests arrive. 7 o'clock. Dinner is served. 8 o'clock. Speeches. 8:30. The announcement. That was when it would happen. Victoria would push for the signature. She would corner Evelyn, and when I stepped in, she would snap. I knew the slap was coming. I could feel it in the narrative arc of our lives. Violence is the last resort of the incompetent, and Victoria was about to be proven very, very incompetent. I closed my eyes and visualized the moment. I would not flinch. I would not cry. I would let her strike me, and I would let the sound of that slap echo through the room, shattering her facade forever. Tomorrow, the world would see the perfect mother for who she really was. And then, my grandmother would ask her question. One question. $3.4 million. I smiled in the dark. It was going to be a hell of a birthday party. The sound of a palm striking flesh is distinctive. It is a wet, sharp crack that cuts through ambient noise like a gunshot. When Victoria slapped me, the physics of the room seemed to change instantly. The jazz band, stationed in the corner near the potted palms, stopped playing mid-measure. The drummer caught his cymbal to silence the vibration. The murmur of 200 conversations died out in a single second, leaving a vacuum of silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. My head was turned to the right from the force of the blow. The skin on my left cheek felt like it had been touched by a hot iron, a blooming, radiating heat that throbbed in time with my pulse. My ear was ringing, a high-pitched whine that sounded like a poorly tuned radio frequency. But I did not cry. I did not gasp. I did not bring my hand up to cover the mark she had just left on my face. I slowly turned my head back to face her. Victoria was standing with her arms still slightly raised, her chest heaving inside her silk gown. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, wild with a mixture of adrenaline and sudden, dawning horror. She was waiting for me to scream. She was waiting for me to run away, to play the role of the hysterical, emotional stepdaughter she had cast me in for 2 decades. Instead, I stood perfectly still. I locked eyes with her and let my arms hang loose at my sides. I was not a child in a garage anymore. I was a security analyst who had stared down international cyber terrorists. I knew that in a hostage situation, the person who stays calm controls the room. The silence stretched out for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. It was agonizing. Then, the whispers started. They rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "Did she just hit her?" A woman in diamonds whispered near the front, her voice carrying further than she intended. "My God, right in the middle of the ballroom," a man muttered. "That is Daniel's daughter, isn't it?" The social veneer of the perfect family that Victoria had spent 20 years lacquering onto our lives cracked wide open. You could almost hear the splintering sound. These were people who prided themselves on decorum. They could tolerate backstabbing, embezzlement, and adultery, provided it was done behind closed doors with a smile. But physical violence at a black-tie gala? That was messy. That was low class. My father, Daniel, seemed to wake up from a trance. His face was pale, drained of all color. He looked at me, then at Victoria, his eyes darting back and forth as if he were trying to solve a complex equation. "Vicky," he stammered, his voice shaking. "Vicky, what did you do?" I waited, a part of me, the small, foolish part that still wanted a father, hoped he would step between us. I hoped he would turn to me and ask if I was hurt. I hoped he would finally be the shield he should have been when I was 12. But he did not. His first instinct, honed by years of placating her, kicked in. He reached out and grabbed Victoria's hand, the same hand that had just struck me. He pulled her slightly behind him, shielding her from the judgment of the room. "It is okay," he mumbled to the guests nearest to us, offering a sickly, terrified smile. "It is just high emotions, family stress. Please, everyone, it is fine." Bree stood frozen a few feet away. Her glass of champagne was tilting dangerously in her hand, liquid dripping onto the expensive carpet. Her mouth was open. She looked at her mother with a kind of terrified recognition. Bree had grown up believing the lie that Victoria was a benevolent queen who only wanted the best for us. She had never seen the mask slip this far. She had never seen the violence. Victoria, sensing the tide turning against her, tried to salvage the narrative. She snatched her hand away from my father and pointed a shaking finger at me. "She provoked me!" Victoria shrieked. Her voice was too loud, too shrill for the acoustic space. "You all saw it. She was whispering things to me. She was threatening the family. I am just trying to protect my mother-in-law's legacy." She looked around the room, her eyes pleading for allies. "You know how she is. She is unstable. She has always been jealous of Bree. She came here tonight just to ruin everything." I watched her spiral. It was fascinating in a grotesque way. She was using the Darvo tactic: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It was a classic abuser's playbook. A young waiter, no older than 20, was standing near us with a tray of empty glasses. He looked terrified, but he leaned in to whisper to his manager, loud enough for the circle of people around us to hear. "Should we cut the feed? The live stream is on the main screens in the lobby." Victoria froze. "What?" she breathed. "The recap video, ma'am," the manager said. stepping forward, looking apologetic but firm. And the member live stream. You asked for total coverage of the speech. Victoria looked up. For the first time, she saw the red tally lights on the cameras mounted on the pillars. She saw the videographer who had not lowered his lens. She saw the phones raised in the hands of the guests. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. She realized that her claim of provocation was useless because the tape would show I had been standing still, speaking quietly, while she was the one who lunged. Panic set in. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure malice. She stepped into my personal space again, lowering her voice to a hiss that she thought the microphones wouldn't pick up. "You ungrateful little snake," she spat. "I took you in. I raised you. And this is how you repay me? By humiliating me? You should be on your knees thanking me for not throwing you out on the street when your mother died." I did not flinch. I could smell the expensive wine on her breath. I could see the heavy foundation settling into the fine lines around her mouth. I leaned in, just an inch, so only she, and the sensitive lapel microphone the videographer was using, could hear. "If everyone wants to know how many times this happens at home," I said, my voice calm, level, and terrifyingly reasonable, "maybe I should let the cameras tell the story instead of me." A collective gasp went through the room. I did not say she beat me as a child. I did not lie. But I let the implication hang there. The grabbing of arms, the shoving, the throwing of vases, the slamming of doors, the physical intimidation that had been part of her repertoire for years whenever she lost control. By implying a pattern, I turned the slap from a moment of passion into evidence of character. The guests recoiled. I saw Arthur Sterling, the investor I had met earlier, look at Victoria with undisguised disgust. I saw the board members of Everpine exchanging dark looks. The brand was family-friendly. This was not family-friendly. Suddenly, a rhythmic sound cut through the tension. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a cane hitting the marble floor. Bree and Daniel stepped aside. My grandmother, Evelyn Rowan, was standing up. She had been seated in the place of honor at the head table, watching the entire scene unfold with the stillness of a sphinx. Now, she moved. She did not rush. She walked with a slow, deliberate cadence that commanded absolute attention. She stopped 3 feet away from us. She looked at the master of ceremonies, who was hovering nervously by the stage. "Play the music," Evelyn ordered. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 50 years of boardroom command. "Something soft, Mozart, and turn it down low." The MC scrambled to obey. A string quartet recording began to play softly over the speakers, cutting the deafening silence but not drowning out the voices. "Everyone, please sit," Evelyn said, gesturing to the room. "The show is not over. In fact, I believe we are just getting to the most important part." The guests hesitated, then slowly sank back into their chairs, their eyes glued to the drama in the center of the room. Nobody wanted to leave. This was better than any opera. Victoria, seeing Evelyn approach, let out a sob. It was a fake, theatrical sound that I had heard 1,000 times. She rushed toward Evelyn, hands outstretched. "Mom!" Victoria cried. "Oh, Mom, I am so sorry. I snapped. "You know how much pressure I have been under, taking care of you, running the estate. And then Cassidy comes in here with her attitude, trying to undermine everything we have built. I was just protecting us. I was protecting the family from her ingratitude." She reached out to clutch Evelyn's arm, looking for the familiar physical anchor she had exploited for years. Evelyn did not pull away this time. She simply stood there, solid as a mountain, and looked at Victoria's hand on her sleeve. She looked at it as if it were a stain. Victoria slowly retracted her hand, sensing the chill. Evelyn turned her head. She looked at me. For a moment, her eyes softened. She scanned my face, looking at the red mark on my cheek. "Cassidy," she said gently, "are you all right?" "I am fine, Grandma," I said. My voice was steady. "I am used to it." Another gasp from the room, another nail in the coffin. Evelyn nodded. She turned back to Victoria. She adjusted her grip on her cane, planting it firmly on the floor. She stood up to her full height, which was not much. But at that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. "You say you are protecting the family. Vicky," Evelyn said. Her tone was conversational, almost curious. "You say you are overwhelmed by the sacrifice of taking care of me and the business." "I am," Victoria wept, dabbing at dry eyes. "I have given my life to this family. Mom, I have sacrificed everything." "Sacrifice," Evelyn repeated the word, rolling it around in her mouth like a stone. "That is a heavy word." The room was dead silent again. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Evelyn took a step closer to Victoria. Her eyes were like ice. "If you claim to sacrifice so much for this family," Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming sharp and clear as a blade, "then let me ask you just one question." Victoria blinked, looking confused. She had expected a scolding about etiquette, or perhaps a lecture about self-control. She was not ready for what was coming. "What is it, Mom?" Victoria asked, her voice trembling. Evelyn stared straight into her soul. Where did the $3.4 million transferred from Everpine to V&R Horizons over the past 5 years sacrifice itself to Vicky? The question landed like a physical blow. It was heavier than the slap. It was louder than the scream. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes bulged. The color that had started to return to her face vanished again, leaving her looking gray and sickly. The room erupted in hushed whispers. "Did she say 3 million? V&R Horizons? Isn't that a shell company? My God, is she embezzling?" The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. We were no longer in a family melodrama. We were in a crime scene. The air was no longer charged with emotional discomfort. It was charged with legal liability. I watched Victoria's face. I saw the gears turning as she tried to process how Evelyn knew. She looked at Daniel, who was staring at his mother with his mouth agape. She looked at Bree, who was shrinking back against a pillar. And then she looked at me. And in my eyes, she saw the answer. She saw the emails. She saw the bank records. She saw the cold, hard data that I had spent weeks compiling. She realized, in that split second, that the introverted computer girl she had slapped wasn't a victim. I was the executioner. Evelyn did not wait for an answer. She reached into the pocket of her blazer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a bank statement. She held it up, not for Victoria to see, but for the room. "I have the records right here," Evelyn said to the stunned crowd. $12,500 a month for consulting, $45,000 for branding the same week you were in Italy, $30,000 for audits the week Bree got her new car. Bree let out a small, strangled sound. "Mom?" she whispered. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Victoria looked like a trapped animal. She looked at the exits. She looked at the cameras. There was nowhere to run. It is a misunderstanding," Victoria stammered, her voice cracking. "It is creative accounting. It is for tax purposes. Daniel knows about it. Daniel, tell her." She grabbed my father's arm, shaking him. "Tell her it is for the taxes." Daniel looked at his wife. He looked at the woman who had dominated his life for 20 years. Then he looked at his mother, who was holding the proof of his wife's theft. Daniel started, his voice weak. "I didn't know about V&R Horizons. Vicky, I thought you said the marketing budget was going to an agency in New York." "It is an agency," Victoria screamed, losing all composure. "It is my agency. I manage the brand. I deserve to be paid for my work." $3.4 million? Evelyn asked, her voice cutting through the hysteria. "For a brand that has not seen a new logo in 10 years? No, Vicky, that is not payment. That is theft." I stepped forward then. I opened my laptop case, which I had left on a side table, and plugged it into the main projection system that was meant to be used for the birthday slideshow. "Actually," I said, speaking into the silence, It is more than theft. It is fraud, and I think the guests might want to see the timeline. I hit a key. The giant screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a photo of Evelyn, flickered and changed. A spreadsheet appeared. It was simple, color-coded, and devastating. It showed the dates of the transfers on the left and Victoria's social media posts on the right. June 10th, transfer of $15,000. June 12th, Victoria posts photo of new diamond earrings. August 14th, transfer of $45,000. August 16th, Victoria checks into the Grand Hotel in Capri. The correlation was undeniable. It was brutal. The guests gasped. Phones were raised higher. The live stream was capturing every pixel of the evidence. Victoria stood in the center of the ruin she had created. The slap she had given me was forgotten. The physical pain in my cheek was a distant memory. All that mattered now was the numbers on the screen. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I did not see a monster. I saw a pathetic, greedy woman who had underestimated the quiet people in the room. You wanted to be the center of attention, Victoria, I said softly. Now you are. The silence that followed my grandmother's question was different from the silence that had followed the slap. The silence after the slap had been emotional, charged with shock and scandal. But this silence? This was heavy. This was the silence of mental calculus. The room was filled with investment bankers, tax attorneys, and corporate board members. These were people who spoke the language of finance fluently. When they heard the words $3.4 million and V&R horizons, they did not need a calculator to understand what was happening. They recognized the structure immediately: a vague consulting firm, a massive outflow of cash, a family member on the payroll. It was the classic anatomy of embezzlement. I watched the faces of the guests in the front row. Arthur Sterling, the venture capitalist who had praised my work earlier, narrowed his eyes. He looked from Victoria to the board members of Everpine, and I could practically see him adjusting his risk assessment of the company in real time. Victoria tried to laugh. It was a brittle, jagged sound that grated against the quiet room. "Oh, Mother," she said, waving a hand dismissively, though the tremors in her fingers were visible even from where I stood. "You are confusing everyone. Please, this is hardly the time to discuss administrative overhead. V&R Horizons is a legitimate marketing agency. We have been working on a complete rebrand for the lodges. It costs money to make money. Everyone knows that." She turned to the crowd, flashing a desperate, winning smile. "It is just standard operating procedure, marketing costs. You all understand business expenses, right? Is a week at the Four Seasons in the Maldives a business expense, Vicky?" Evelyn asked. Evelyn did not shout. She simply reached into the deep pocket of her blazer and pulled out a sheaf of papers. They were folded, but she snapped them open with a sharp wrist movement. "I have the invoices here," Evelyn said, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "Invoice number 402, dated January 12th, $28,000 for tropical market research. That same week, you posted a photo of yourself drinking a coconut martini on a private beach in Malé." Victoria stiffened. "That was a research trip. We were looking at luxury competitors." "Invoice number 516, Evelyn continued, relentless. "Dated September 10th, $35,000 for European design consultation. That coincides exactly with the week you and Brianna attended New York Fashion Week and stayed in the penthouse suite at the plaza." "We were meeting with interior designers," Victoria screeched. Her mask was slipping, revealing the panicked, cornered animal beneath. "You are twisting everything. I was working." From the back of the room, a male voice spoke up. It was my cousin Mark, the auditor I had flown in from Chicago. He stepped out from the shadows, holding his own glass of champagne, his face grim. "That explains it," Mark said, loud enough for the room to hear. 2 years ago, when I offered to do a friendly audit of the books for Uncle Daniel, you told me the files were corrupted. You said the new security protocols prevented external access. You blocked me from the system. Victoria. "I did no such thing," Victoria yelled, spinning around to face him. "We hired a better firm. A real firm. You hired a firm owned by your yoga instructor's husband, Mark shot back. I looked it up. The crowd began to murmur. The tide was turning. It was no longer a family squabble. It was an exposure of incompetence and theft. I decided it was time to end the debate. The numbers do not lie, I said. I turned back to my laptop, which was still connected to the main projection system. And neither does the data trail. I hit the enter key. The massive screen behind the stage changed again. Gone were the simple spreadsheets. In their place was a flowchart. It was simple, stark, and devastatingly clear. I had designed it to be understood by a 5-year-old. On the left was a blue box labeled Everpine Operating Account. In the middle was a red box labeled V&R, Horizons LLC. On the right were 2 green boxes. Victoria Rowan, Personal and Cayman Holdings Group B. Thick arrows showed the flow of money. It left Everpine, washed through the shell company, and landed directly in Victoria's pockets. I tracked the routing numbers, I said, my voice cool and professional. I spoke to the room, not to Victoria. This is not marketing. This is layering. The money goes into V&R Horizons, sits for 48 hours, and then 80% of it is transferred to a personal checking account. The other 20% goes to an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. I pointed to the screen. See that transfer on March 3rd? $50,000. 2 days later, a wire transfer of $40,000 leaves V&R Horizons and hits an account at First National Bank. Who owns that account? I clicked the next slide. A bank document appeared on the screen, redacted for privacy except for the account holder's name. Victoria A. Rowan. The room gasped. It was the smoking gun. "You hacked my bank!" Victoria screamed. She lunged toward me, but my father caught her by the waist, holding her back. "That is illegal. You are a criminal. Arrest her. She is a cyber terrorist." "I did not hack your bank, Victoria," I said calmly. "You paid for your yacht rental using your Everpine corporate email address for the confirmation receipt. And since I am the authorized security consultant for Everpine as of 3 days ago, auditing the email server was part of my job description." I turned to the crowd. It is all public record or authorized internal data. There is no magic here, just greed. The guests began to back away, physically back away. It was a visceral reaction to the stench of scandal. The board members of Everpine were huddled together, whispering furiously. I saw one of them pulling out his phone, likely calling his own lawyer to distance himself from the coming implosion. Bree was standing near the dessert table. She looked at the screen. She saw the dates. She saw the amounts. "The car," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "The convertible. You bought it the day after the transfer." Victoria stopped struggling against Daniel's grip. She looked at her daughter. "Bree, honey, do not listen to her. I did it for us. I did it so you could have the life you deserve." "You stole it?" Bree asked, tears streaming down her face. "You told me Grandma gave us a bonus. You told me the business was booming." "It is our money," Victoria insisted, her logic twisting into a pretzel. "I am the one running the company. I am the one dealing with your grandmother's moods. I earned that money. It is just compensation." "It is fraud," a deep voice said from the crowd. It was Mr. Galloway, the investor who had asked about me earlier. "And it is tax evasion if you did not declare that income. Victoria, you are looking at federal prison time." Victoria blanched. The word prison seemed to snap the last tether of her reality. "No," she whimpered. "No. I have the power of attorney. I am the guardian. I can authorize these expenses." "About that," Evelyn said. My grandmother took a step forward. She looked stronger than I had ever seen her. The frailty she had worn like a shawl all evening had slipped off, revealing the iron spine beneath. "We had the documents analyzed by a forensic handwriting expert this morning," Evelyn said. "The power of attorney you tried to get me to sign? The drafts you sent to your lawyer? We compared them to the versions you gave me last month." Evelyn held up another document. You changed the pages. Vicky, you swapped out the page regarding the beneficiary structure after I had reviewed the initial draft. You thought because my eyes are bad, I wouldn't notice that you changed trustee oversight to sole executive authority. Evelyn threw the papers onto the floor at Victoria's feet. That is forgery, Evelyn said, and it voids every single claim you think you have to this family's assets. Daniel finally let go of his wife. He stepped back, looking at her as if she were a stranger. He looked at the woman he had defended for 20 years, the woman for whom he had sacrificed his relationship with his firstborn daughter. You lied to me, Daniel said. His voice was hollow. You told me the business was struggling. You told me we had to cut costs. You made me fire the groundskeepers. You made me cut the employee health benefits. I had to, Victoria cried, reaching for him, to keep the cash flow up. Daniel, please, you have to understand. I needed the liquidity. You fired loyal employees so you could go to Fashion Week? Daniel asked. The realization washed over him, crushing him. He looked at me. Cassidy, He could not finish the sentence. The shame was too great. He had allowed this. He had been the passive accomplice to the looting of his own mother's legacy. The room was deadly quiet now. The only sound was Victoria's ragged breathing. She looked around, realizing she had no allies left. The socialites she had courted were looking at the floor. The lawyers were looking at the evidence. Her husband had stepped away. Her daughter was crying in horror. Evelyn tapped her cane on the floor again. The game is over. Victoria, Evelyn said, there will be no power of attorney signed tonight. In fact, there is a new legal structure in place as of 9 o'clock this morning. Evelyn motioned to the back of the room. Mrs. Vance, the attorney from Highland and Associates, stepped forward. She was holding a leather portfolio. My client, Mrs. Vance said, her voice projecting clearly, has transferred the controlling interest of Everpine Lodges into the Rowan Integrity Trust. This trust is irrevocable. Victoria's eyes widened. You cannot do that. You are not competent. I am perfectly competent, Evelyn snapped, and I have 3 doctor's notes dated yesterday to prove it. The trust is active, and the terms are very specific. Any beneficiary found to be engaging in criminal activity against the estate is automatically disqualified from receiving distributions. Victoria let out a low keen, a sound of pure financial agony. She realized her golden parachute had just been cut. But who controls it? Victoria hissed. Daniel? He cannot run a trust. He is weak. Daniel flinched, but he did not argue. He knew it was true. No, Evelyn said. Daniel is a beneficiary. Brianna is a beneficiary, but neither of them has executive control. Evelyn turned and pointed the head of her cane directly at me. The trust has a supervisor, Evelyn announced, an independent party with absolute veto power over all financial transactions, hiring and firing, a person who knows how to read a ledger, a person who knows how to track a lie. The room turned to look at me. I stood by my laptop, the blue light of the screen casting a glow on my face. The red mark on my cheek was still throbbing, a badge of the battle I had just won. The supervisor is Cassidy, Evelyn said. The shock in the room was palpable. The stepdaughter, the outcast, the girl who had been slapped in the face 5 minutes ago was now, effectively, the boss. Victoria stared at me. Her mouth worked, opening and closing, but no words came out. She looked at the screen with the flow chart. She looked at the guests who were now judging her. She looked at the immense wealth she had thought was hers, slipping through her fingers like water. You? She whispered. You are just a computer geek. You are nobody. I closed my laptop with a definitive snap. The screen went dark, plunging the room back into the ambient lighting of the chandeliers. I am the person who knows where the money went. Victoria, I said. And I am the person who is going to make sure you pay every single cent of it back. I walked over to where my grandmother stood. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, presenting a united front that this family had not seen in 2 decades. Now, I said, looking at the stunned crowd, I think the party is over. Please drive safely." But nobody moved. They were paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the collapse. In the span of 10 minutes, the Rowan family dynasty had been dismantled and reassembled. The stepmother had beaten the daughter, and the grandmother had nuked the stepmother, all without firing a single shot. And all it took was one question about $3.4 million. The shockwave of the financial revelation had passed, and now the silence in the ballroom began to fracture. For 20 years, the Rowan family had operated under a code of silence enforced by Victoria's smile and my father's passivity. We had walked on eggshells, swallowed our grievances, and looked the other way to keep the peace. But looking at the flowchart on the screen, at the undeniable evidence of theft, the peace evaporated. The first crack in the dam came from an unexpected source. It was my great-aunt Margaret, Evelyn's younger sister, who was standing near the back of the room in a teal dress. She had been marginalized for years, treated like a distant relative rather than a close sister. "I knew it," Margaret said. Her voice was shaking, but it carried clearly across the room. She stepped forward, clutching her purse. "I called the lodge every Christmas for the last 4 years, every single year." Victoria picked up the phone. "She told me you did not want to speak to anyone. Evelyn, she told me you were depressed and that seeing family only upset you." Evelyn looked at her sister, pain flashing across her face. "I never said that. Margaret, I sat by the phone every Christmas morning waiting for calls that never came. Victoria told me everyone was too busy traveling to bother with an old woman." "She changed the number," another voice chimed in. "It was my cousin David. I tried to visit the lodge last summer. The gate code had been changed. When I called the house, Victoria told me you were in a fragile mental state and that the doctor had forbidden visitors. She made us think you were losing your mind." "Grandma." The floodgates opened. Stories began to pour out from the relatives I had flown in, the people Victoria had carefully pruned from the family tree. "She sent back my wedding invitation unopened," a cousin said. "She told us the trust fund for the grandchildren's education was empty because of bad market investments," another added, glaring at the screen that showed the money had gone to the Cayman Islands. Victoria stood in the center of this verbal firing squad, her head whipping back and forth as the accusations mounted. These were not just complaints about rudeness. They were pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture of systematic isolation. She had turned my grandmother into a high-security prisoner in her own home, using the guise of care to cut her off from anyone who might check the bank accounts. My father, Daniel, looked like a man trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. He was sweating profusely, his eyes darting between his weeping wife and his angry mother. "Now, wait a minute," Daniel stammered, holding up his hands. "Let us not jump to conclusions. Everyone is emotional. I am sure there is a logical explanation for the missed calls. Victoria has been very protective of Mom's health. Maybe she misunderstood the doctor's orders." He was desperate. He was clinging to the shred of the reality he had built his life on. To admit Victoria was a villain meant admitting he had been a fool, a negligent son, and a terrible father for 2 decades. "Misunderstood?" Evelyn asked sharply. She turned to me. "Cassidy, play the file." I nodded. During my surveillance of the house, I had not just captured video, I had captured audio from the kitchen, where Victoria often took her private calls while drinking her morning wine. I clicked a file named Kitchen Nav 12 Wave. The sound of Victoria's voice boomed through the ballroom's high-quality speakers. It was crisp, clear, and dripping with contempt. "I do not care if the old bat is lonely. Lanner, keep the family away. If her sister talks to her, she might start asking why the dividends are low this quarter. Just tell them she is senile. Tell them she drools. I do not care what you say. Just buy me 2 more years. Once she kicks the bucket, or once I get that signature, we can dump her in a facility and sell the land. I am done playing nursemaid to a corpse." The audio cut off. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. Daniel stood frozen. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. The glass he was holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, but nobody flinched. He looked at Victoria. He looked at her as if he had never seen her before. The excuse of misunderstanding was gone. The illusion of the devoted daughter-in-law was incinerated. There was only the naked, ugly truth of her malice. "You called my mother a corpse," Daniel whispered. His voice was broken. You said you were going to dump her." "Daniel, that was taken out of context," Victoria shrieked, grabbing at his lapels. "I was venting. I was stressed. You know how I get when I'm tired. I love your mother." Daniel pushed her hands away. It was a clumsy, weak shove, but it was the first time in my life I had ever seen him physically reject her. He stepped back, revulsion written on his features. Near the edge of the stage, Bree was shaking. She looked like she was going to be sick. She had been raised on the myth of Victoria's perfection. She was the princess of the kingdom Victoria had built on stolen land. Now, the castle was falling. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She took a step toward me, then stopped, terrified. I softened my expression. I stepped away from the laptop and walked over to the corner where she was shivering. I did not make a scene. I kept my voice low, for her ears only. "Bree," I said gently. "I did not know," she sobbed quietly, her hands twisting in the fabric of her silver dress. "I swear, Cassidy, I thought we were just rich. I did not know she was stealing from Grandma." "You knew something was wrong," I said. It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "You saw the papers. You saw the emails about the offshore accounts. You asked her if it was legal. And when she told you not to worry, you stopped asking." Bree looked down, shame flooding her face. "I was scared. I did not want to lose everything." "I know," I said. "It is comfortable to close your eyes. But you are not a child anymore, Bree. You are 22 years old." I pointed to the screen, where the evidence was still glowing. "You do not have to take the blame for what she did," I told her. "You are not the one who set up the shell company, but you have a choice to make right now. You can keep standing there, pretending you are the victim, or you can open your eyes and decide which side of the line you want to live on. The truth is hard, but it is the only place where you are actually safe." Bree looked at her mother, who was currently screaming at Daniel. Then she looked at Evelyn, who stood tall and dignified. Bree took a deep breath. She wiped her face, smearing her expensive makeup. She stepped away from the wall. She did not run to Victoria. She walked over and stood next to Evelyn. She did not say a word, but the physical movement spoke volumes. She had chosen. Victoria saw it. She saw her golden child defect. "Bree?" Victoria gasped. "Bree, get over here! Do not stand with them. They are trying to ruin us." Bree did not move. Evelyn signaled to Mrs. Vance. The lawyer stepped forward again, holding the new trust documents. "Mrs. Victoria Rowan," Mrs. Vance announced, her voice cutting through Victoria's hysterics. "Based on the evidence presented here tonight, including the bank records and the admission of intent to defraud on the audio recording, the protector of the Rowan Integrity Trust is activating the suspension clause." "What does that mean?" Victoria spat. "It means you are removed from all executive functions of Everpine Lodges, effective immediately." Mrs. Vance said, "Your access to the corporate accounts has already been revoked. The credit cards in your purse have been canceled. Security is currently changing the locks on the administrative offices in Portland." Victoria laughed, a manic, desperate sound. "You cannot do that. I have rights. I will sue you. I will burn this company to the ground." "You can try," Mrs. Vance said calmly, "but I should inform you that Mrs. Evelyn Rowan has instructed us regarding the path forward." The lawyer paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "We are prepared to hand this entire file over to the district attorney tomorrow morning," Mrs. Vance said. "The embezzlement charges, the elder abuse, the tax fraud. You would likely face 10 to 15 years in federal prison." Victoria went still. The fight drained out of her at the mention of prison. "However," Mrs. Vance continued, "Mrs. Rowan offers an alternative. If you agree to a full, uncontested divorce from Daniel Rowan, If you agree to repay the $3.4 million by liquidating your personal assets, and if you agree to leave the state of Colorado and never contact the family again, we will not file charges. We will treat this as a private civil settlement. I looked at my grandmother. This was her mercy. She could have sent Victoria to jail. She had every right to, but Evelyn did not want a trial. She did not want the Rowan name dragged through the mud of a public scandal for years. She just wanted the cancer removed. She wanted her home back. It is a generous offer, I said, stepping up beside the lawyer. Considering you just slapped the supervisor of the trust in front of 200 witnesses, I could press assault charges right now. Victoria, and unlike the financial crimes, that one is already recorded on video. Victoria looked at me. The hate in her eyes was still there, but it was dull now, buried under fear. She looked at the guests. The guests were no longer whispering, they were standing. Arthur Sterling, the investor, walked over to me. He did not even look at Victoria. He extended his hand to me. Cassidy, he said loud enough for people to hear, I owe you an apology. When your stepmother told us you were difficult, I believed her. I see now that you were just the only one with a moral compass. If Everpine needs any external capital during this transition, you call me. I bet on people, not just business plans, and I would bet on you any day. Thank you, Arthur, I said, taking his hand. It started a chain reaction. One by one, the guests turned their backs on Victoria. Business partners walked over to shake Evelyn's hand. Cousins who had ignored me for years came up to touch my arm, whispering apologies. We didn't know, Cassidy. She told us you hated us. Thank you for bringing us back. Victoria stood alone in the middle of the room. The crowd had physically reorganized itself, leaving her in a circle of isolation. The perfect hostess was now a pariah. She tried to grab the arm of a woman she considered her best friend, a socialite named Lenore. Lenore, tell them, Victoria pleaded. Tell them how hard I work. Lenore pulled her arm away as if Victoria were contagious. I think you should leave, Vicky, Lenore said coldly. This is embarrassing. It is a tax strategy, Victoria yelled, her voice cracking, repeating the lie that no one believed. It is smart. You are all just jealous. Nobody answered her. The silence was the verdict. Daniel finally moved. He walked over to his mother. He looked older than his years, a man who had been hollowed out by his own weakness. He fell to his knees. He did not care about his tuxedo pants. He knelt on the hard marble floor in front of Evelyn and buried his face in her lap, sobbing like a child. I am sorry, he wept. Mom, I am so sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I let her hurt you. I let her hurt Cassidy. Evelyn looked down at her son. She did not look angry. She looked sad. She placed a hand on his head, stroking his graying hair. Get up, Daniel, she said softly. I should have protected you, he choked out. I failed. You do not need to protect me, Evelyn said, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the room. I am not a fragile thing, and Cassidy certainly does not need your protection. She saved herself long ago. She lifted his chin so he had to look at her. You just need to stop letting other people decide who you love, Evelyn said. That is all I ever wanted. You let her decide that your daughter was unlovable. You let her decide that your mother was a burden. You gave away your heart because it was easier than fighting for it. Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his face. He stood up shakily and turned to me. Cassidy, he said. He reached out a hand, then pulled it back. Unworthy. I do not expect you to forgive me, but thank you. Thank you for being stronger than I was. I looked at my father. I did not feel the rush of warmth I had craved as a child. That ship had sailed, but I felt a release. The anger that had fueled me for years began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, sturdy peace. I did not do it for you, Dad, I said honestly. I did it for the truth. Victoria realized it was over. The audience had left the theater. There was no one left to manipulate. She looked at the security guards who were waiting at the edge of the room, signaled by Mrs. Vance. "This isn't over," she screamed, but it was a hollow threat. She turned and ran. She did not walk with grace. She ran out of the ballroom, her heels clicking frantically on the marble, fleeing the wreckage of the life she had stolen. The party ended not with a toast, but with a collective exhale. The music did not restart. The guests began to filter out, speaking in hushed, respectful tones. They knew they had witnessed something historic. I stood by the table, closing down the projection system. My cousin Sarah walked over and wrapped her arms around me. "You did it," Sarah whispered. "You actually did it." "We did it," I said, hugging her back. "No," Sarah said, pulling back to look at me. You took the slap. You took the heat. You brought us back." I looked around the room. The perfect family portraits were gone. The lie was dead. But as I looked at my grandmother, sitting with Bree and Daniel, talking quietly, I realized something else. The table was messy. It was broken. But for the first time in 20 years, the people sitting at it were real. The last guest had departed, leaving the grand ballroom in a state of disarray that mirrored the Rowan family itself. Empty champagne glasses littered the tables like fallen soldiers, and the air still held the faint, stale scent of expensive perfume and scandal. The staff had been dismissed from the room by Mrs. Vance, leaving only the 5 of us: Evelyn, Daniel, Victoria, Bree, and me. The silence that followed the exodus was not peaceful. It was the breathless calm before a final detonation. Victoria was pacing near the head table, her silk dress swishing aggressively against the floor. She was no longer the polished socialite. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and her face was a mask of smeared mascara and pure, unadulterated rage. She stopped pacing and spun around to face us, her eyes locking onto me with the intensity of a laser sight. "Are you happy now?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You little wretch! You have destroyed everything. You humiliated me in front of the entire city. Do you have any idea what you have done? I will sue you for defamation. I will call the Denver Post. I will tell them you hacked my accounts and doctored those files." She turned to Daniel, grabbing his arm, her nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Daniel, do not just stand there. Call security. Have her arrested. She ruined your mother's birthday. She destroyed our life." I watched her tantrum with a strange sense of detachment. For years, her shouting had made me shrink. It had made me feel small, powerless, and terrified. But tonight, standing next to my grandmother, I realized that her volume was not strength. It was just noise. I took a step forward. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "I did not destroy your life, Victoria," I said, my voice steady and cool. "And I certainly did not destroy Grandma's birthday. All I did was turn on the lights. If you are ugly when the lights are on, that is not the fault of the switch." "You are a snake," Victoria spat. "You have been plotting this. You have always hated me because I was the one who stepped up when your mother died. You are just a bitter, jealous child." "I am not a child," I said. "And I did not leave this family because I was jealous. I left because there was no room for the truth in the house you built. You just proved to everyone in this room exactly why I had to go." Evelyn tapped her cane against the floor, a sharp, authoritative sound that cut through Victoria's hysteria. "Enough," Evelyn said. She looked at Victoria with a gaze that was no longer angry, just profoundly disappointed. "Do you know why I asked you that question, Vicky?" Evelyn asked slowly. Victoria wiped her nose, looking defiant. "Because you are confused. Because she manipulated you." "No," Evelyn said. "I asked you about the $3.4 million, not because I cared about the money. Money can be recovered. Lodges can be sold. I asked you because I wanted to see what you would do when you were cornered." Evelyn took a step closer, leaning heavily on her cane but standing tall. "I wanted to see if, when forced to answer for your actions in front of witnesses, you would choose to tell the truth, or if you would choose to attack someone weaker than you." The room went deadly silent. And you chose, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You did not answer me. You turned around and you slapped Cassidy. You chose violence. You chose to hurt the person you thought could not fight back. That was the answer. Vicky, that was the proof. Not the bank transfer, but the slap. It showed us exactly who you are. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but the logic was impenetrable. She had exposed her own nature in a single, violent impulse. Mrs. Vance, the attorney, cleared her throat. She placed a document on the table next to the half-eaten birthday cake. Mr. Rowan, Mrs. Vance said, looking at my father. We need to resolve this now. The police are not here yet, but they can be called, or we can sign this. Daniel looked at the document. It was a cooperation agreement. It stipulated that he would immediately return the voting shares he had unwittingly assigned to Victoria, that he would cooperate fully with the forensic audit, and that he would attend mandatory personal counseling as a condition of remaining a beneficiary of the trust. Daniel, do not sign that, Victoria shrieked. They are trying to trick you. We fight this. We hire our own lawyers. Daniel looked at his wife, then he looked at his mother, who was watching him with a mixture of love and pain, and finally, he looked at me. He looked at the red mark on my cheek that was now starting to bruise. For 20 years, Daniel Rowan had chosen the path of least resistance. He had chosen the easy lie over the hard truth. He walked over to the table. He picked up the pen. I am done fighting, Vicky, Daniel said, his voice breaking. And I am done hiding. Daniel, she gasped, as if he had struck her. I signed everything you put in front of me, he said, tears leaking from his eyes. I looked the other way when you were cruel to Cassidy because I didn't want you to be cruel to me. I was a coward. But I'm not going to let you steal my mother's home. Not anymore. He signed the document. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the sound of a marriage ending and a spine finally straightening. Victoria let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. She looked at Bree. Bree, she pleaded. Baby, come with me. We will leave. We will go to the condo in Vale. We do not need them. Bree stood next to Evelyn. She was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked at her mother, the woman who had bought her cars, clothes, and vacations with stolen money. The woman who had taught her that image was everything. I can't, Mom, Bree whispered. What? Victoria stared at her. I can't go with you, Bree said, her voice gaining a tiny fraction of strength. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the fraud, but I know now, and if I go with you, I become part of the lie. Victoria recoiled. She looked around the empty room. She had no allies, no money, no power. Mrs. Rowan, Mrs. Vance said firmly, the terms of the agreement require you to vacate the Everpine premises immediately. You may return to the main house one time, under security escort, to retrieve your personal effects. After that, you are not permitted on any Everpine property. Victoria looked at us one last time. She tried to summon her old arrogance, the sneer that had ruled our household for decades, but it crumbled. She looked old. She looked tired. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the ballroom. The heavy double doors swung shut behind her with a final, dull thud. The air in the room seemed to clear instantly. Bree turned to me. Her face was streaked with mascara. She looked young and terrified. Cassidy, she said, stepping toward me. I am so sorry. I didn't know she hit you. I didn't know any of it. I just saw the version of her she wanted me to see. She looked like she wanted to hug me. She wanted the easy forgiveness, the movie moment where the sisters embrace and the past is forgotten. I did not step forward. I did not open my arms. I believe you, Bree, I said gently. I believe you were blind to it. But being blind was a choice. You enjoyed the view too much to ask where the money for the window came from. Bree flinched, but she nodded, accepting the truth. If you want to fix this, I said, if you want to have a relationship with me, or with Grandma, it starts now, and it starts with the truth. No more filters, No more pretending we are a perfect family for Instagram. We are a mess, and you have to be okay with that.
I will try, Bree whispered.
Evelyn walked over to me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brass key. It was old, tarnished, and simple.
Here, she said, pressing it into my hand.
What is this? I asked. It is the key to the North Lodge, Evelyn said. The small cabin near the tree line. Your mother used to love sitting on the porch there to watch the sunrise. It is not the whole empire. Cassidy, I know you have your own life in Seattle. I know you do not want to run this company forever. She closed my fingers over the key. But this is yours. It is a place where you do not need an invitation. It is a place where you do not need to ask anyone's permission to sit at the table. It is home. I looked at the key. For the first time that night, I felt a lump form in my throat. I had fought for justice, for retribution, for the safety of the estate. But this key, this was simply an acknowledgement that I belonged. I will not stay forever, Grandma, I said, my voice thick. But I will stay until the audit is done. I will use the supervisor authority to clean house. I will make sure the employees get their benefits back. I will make sure the foundation is solid before I go back to my life. That is all I ask, Evelyn said. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed. The city of Denver sprawled out below me, a grid of golden lights in the darkness. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the file from the secure server. It was the raw footage from the ballroom camera. I watched the moment again. I watched Victoria lunge. I watched her hand connect with my face. I watched myself stand still, absorbing the blow without breaking. My finger hovered over the share button. I could upload this to every social media platform in the world. I could destroy her reputation globally in 10 minutes. I could let the internet tear her apart. But I didn't. I created a new folder on my encrypted drive. I named it Proof, not Revenge. I dragged the file into the folder and closed it. I knew that if I ever needed it for a courtroom, it was there. But I did not need the validation of strangers. I did not need the likes or the comments. I had won the only war that mattered. I walked out onto the balcony. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of impending snow. I gripped the railing, feeling the brass key in my pocket, warm against my hip. I thought about my grandmother's question, "What do you do when you are cornered?" I realized then that the last 20 years had been one long corner. I had been backed into the garage, backed out of the photos, backed out of the will. But I hadn't attacked. I hadn't lashed out. I had built. If someone were to ask me now, "Cassidy, what did you do with those years of silence?" I knew exactly what I would say. "I used them to build a new table," I whispered to the city lights. "And from now on, if anyone wants to sit at it, they have to arrive with the truth. No masks, no roles, just the truth." I turned back to the room, leaving the cold night behind. The nightmare was over. The morning was coming, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what the light would reveal. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Cassidy's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story be heard by even more people. Hook. If your family abandoned you to prioritize someone else, what would you do? A. Leave in silence. Or B. Build a new table where only the truth has a seat?